Good? Yep. All right, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Announcements. We'll start with the check over $25,000, which went to Sullivan Architecture PC, Architectural Design Services for Municipal Building and Fire Headquarters, payment number 7. Goes in the capital fund. That was $56,156.06. Next up, there will be fireworks on July 4th, starting at sundown. So please don't call the police department and ask what time the fireworks are. They're at sundown when it gets dark, like they have been every year for the history of mankind, I think. I would also like to thank everyone, including Arlene, who I think was the driving organizer of this year's Juneteenth celebration. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but it was a new format, and I think it was very well received, and it was very festive and fun.
So it was a new format. I think what we're going to do going forward is we called it the Road to Juneteenth. So we had some more serious discussions and adequate time for having sort of the discussions that we need to have around racism and Juneteenth and what it means. And then we had Vinnie Bagwell's unveiling, which was the second event, and the third event was intended to be fun, and it was a great celebration of Black music in the park, and it was well attended, and it was thankfully a lovely day.
Yes, gorgeous. Then I guess the last announcement is that Irvington's Pride celebration will be this Saturday at 2 p.m. At the Main Street School, the steps that lead up from Main Street. So right next to yesterday. Any other announcements anybody has? Welcome, Mitch, from the airport lounge. Yeah, it looks. I don't know. It looks like he's. I don't know.
Looks like he's in the submarine thing.
Or a padded room. I can't tell. Next up, we have correspondence. First, I'm going to read a letter that I did not read last meeting, and the resident would like to make sure that I read it today. 9 days ago, Mark D'Souza of D'Souza Landscaping informed me he would terminate my landscaping at the end of this month. This is dated June 2nd. Even though he's been employed here for a few years, Mark indicated that the new village gas power ordinance has made it impossible to continue servicing Irvington properties, and he could no longer work for any customers here. D'Souza has an excellent reputation, so I'm sure he can easily find business elsewhere. My first editorial comment will be there hasn't been leaf blower usage allowed in the summer, so I'm not sure why he's leaving now, because nothing changes to December 16th. But anyway, it might help you to know that since 1978, I've lived at 15 Meadow Way. My parcel is 0.44 acres. About 1/3 is heavily wooded hill with over 15 decades old maples, oaks, hickories, etc., which are part of our community's designation as a tree city. Needless to say, I was shocked to learn that I would have to find a replacement mid-season. Then I tried to solve my problem. I was given the name of those guys whom I have noticed do projects for the village. I spoke to company owner Chris, I think Pat Colantuno, who indicated that he too would be forced to stop helping out many Irvington homeowners. Other landscapers whom I have phoned did not return my calls. I suspect the reason for their lack of interest is my trees. My yard is quickly mowed, but in the fall there are so many leaves that they have to be collected. Allowing them to remain would create a fire hazard during dry spell. In addition, the tree commission would be unlikely to permit their removal. Researching my situation, I've heard that electric batteries do not last long and that New York state law limits the number of electric batteries that can be transported in a motor vehicle. Would you please verify for me that is correct? I am uncertain why you are eliminating the use of gas batteries. It is because of noise and or air pollution. Having had Con Edison working in my neighborhood for several weeks and expecting to have more home renovations in Senior Ridge, I can attest that these disturbances causing more noise than gas-powered leaf blowers stint. I also believe that landscapers, as well as the Irvington School District, use mowers and other property powered by gas. Is that information accurate? I understand the board will be discussing enforcement of the gas-powered leaf ordinance at the June 5th meeting. As a vintage resident, I've decided not to attend, as my speaking will no doubt elevate my blood pressure dramatically. I ask instead that you not only share copies of my letter with Mayor Smith, Trustee Lunke, Trustee Burgos, Trustee Barton, Trustee Ogrodnik, but you also read it aloud during that session, which I failed to do. You may recall that about 30 years ago, as a village trustee, I sat on the board side of the table. I know how busy a board member can be, but I invite all to visit my home at 15 Meadowway to better understand my dilemma. I welcome any solutions that you and the board can offer. I thank you in advance for my efforts on my behalf. Yours truly, Bobby Morris. Just want to make sure I read that one in its entirety. Next up, we had a letter from Jesna and Phil Sorelli. We're writing in support of keeping the ban of gas-powered leaf blowers all year starting December 16, 2023. Landscapers had 3 years to switch battery-operated equipment, which is substantially cleaner and quieter, and in the long term saves money due to eliminating the need to purchase and manage gasoline. Also, the usage of leaf blowers in winter is absolutely not necessary. Some landscapers suggest that gas-powered leaf blowers help remove ticks in the backyard. Ticks are able to hold on tight to plants, unlike other beneficial insects, which have been harmed by the extremely strong and toxic fumes. In fact, based on the article written by Sacha Spector, Director of Conservation Science for the Scenic Hudson Biodiversity, Hudson River biodiversity impacts Lyme disease. The best way to reduce tick populations on property is to increase its biodiversity, which will not happen with gas-powered leaf blowers. Towns and bands have not reported increased tick numbers, more accidents, or more snow problems. I'm obviously summarizing this letter. We need to protect our health, wildlife, biodiversity, and not harm them with gas-powered leaf blowers. That's Jesna and Phil Sorelli from 11 Grinnell Street. Next one is from Aditi Chang. Thank you for passing our forward-thinking total ban on gas-powered leaf blowers. It was passed 3 years ago. Editorial comment. With every new report on climate change, loss of biodiversity and habitat, and threats to human health, the news gets more dire and call to action more urgent. Our total ban will be an inspiration to many communities to follow suit. I'd like to specifically address the concern that without gas-powered leaf blowers, we'll have more ticks and therefore more Lyme disease. First, with warming climate, the threat of ticks and Lyme disease increases, so we need to do our best to limit how much we are contributing to the burning of fossil fuels in the first place. Second, 2 anecdotal pieces of data from my own yard, which have been freed of any gas machinery for 7 years. They have native plants and 2 small dogs. Third, I reached out to Philippine Hoogland, a resident of Bedford, who was informed and involved with multiple environmental initiatives. I'm pasting below her response to the tick concern. I apologize for the length, but I didn't want to edit out of her important points. He goes on to talk about how talks a lot about ticks, but that's from Aditi Chang. Next is from Charlotte Binns. I'm writing this best by profound gratitude to our local village law disallowing use of gas-powered leaf blowers effective December 16, 2023. The partial year ban that has been in place over the past several years, and for adjusting the law to make fines and enforcement more clear. During the times of the year gas-powered leaf blowers have not been permitted, the quality of life is not. We're not hearing the constant drone of loud GLB machines pervasively throughout the village, both near and far, has greatly improved. Most importantly, though, the effort to stop the use of gas-powered blowers would damage soil, cause pollution, emissions, disrupt work, study, and peaceful enjoyment of our village, will increase the well-being of our village and beyond. Our gas-powered leaf blower ban with proposed improvements for enforcement is a necessary all-in effort. I have practical advice for landscapers and large properties to help with their transition, namely the recognition that leaves can be routinely hit when grass is mowed, and only hard surfaces should be raked, swept, or blown. I've noticed overuse of blowers. Oftentimes, their use isn't needed. Another solution for large developments could be to communicate with condo and town owners that is, the wind has blown some leaves on their deck or walkway, to just sweep them off. The mower will get them the next pass. Thank you for working with the community as the necessity of banning gas-powered leaf blowers. I was just from Neola. She sent it to but anyway, that's from Neola Spec. The Rivertown Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for taking the time to discuss, to hear our presentation during a recent Board of Trustees meeting. As we discussed, the Rivertown Chamber of Commerce is committed to supporting local businesses by utilizing the members' collective expertise in promoting, advocating for, and encouraging the success of both our downtowns and other businesses in our communities. They have a nice table that shows that there's 19 members from Irvington, which is 0.29% of our population, which puts us kind of in the middle of the pack with Ardsley, Davisbury, Hastings. Over the past 2 years, we have targeted an increase in brick and mortar membership through a number of different tactics. The goal is to further increase downtown business membership engagement and therefore drive significant foot traffic and local spending by consumers. This year, in addition to the holiday trolley and the Taste Local trolley, the chapter would like to pilot a Halloween ghost tour trolley. All three will travel a route through Hastings, Dobbs, and Irvington. The trolley rental shot up 86% from 2021 to 2021 to 2022. The same number of hours in comparable route. Despite searching each year our first trolley event, we have found no meaningful competition to top class limo company. To that end, we're asking Hastings-on-Hudson, Dobbs-Ferry, and Irvington for a sum of $3,000. They also had some other suggestions for us, but I think we have to eventually figure out if we're going to contribute to the trolleys. We did discuss it at the village officials committee with the other mayors that have been asked, and I think we're going to try. We want to all come together and figure out what level we can support them all together. So we can talk about that another time. Next, we had 5 letters that made it in before Friday's deadline, and I'd say a half dozen more that were about a dog park. Our dogs deserve a safe place to stay. The current options are unsanctioned and/or unenclosed, all the while our tax dollars pay for a dog from Connecticut, geese relief to chase away geese at our waterfront. Let's keep that investment in town. By building a dog run on our waterfront, we will provide a safe space for our dogs, keep our parks clean. Additionally, designated space for dogs would reduce the amount of dog waste in town, preserve our clean streets and neighborhoods. Even residents that do not own dogs would benefit. There's no reason for citizens of Irvington to drive to another town or pay for out-of-town doggy daycare. It's a quality of life issue, and we all deserve better. Again, 5 letters made it this time. I think there's about 6 more. I would say that there is work on a dog park. Currently, it's not envisioned for Matson Park. Scenic Hudson Park, actually, I don't know, is it the deed that doesn't allow it? Because I think I know it's if you look on their rules, it's only Irvington. I think there's one other Scenic Hudson Park that doesn't allow dogs. All the rest do. But I don't know if that's like.
Yeah, I don't think that's a deed restriction.
That was just a rule that they put in place in the beginning. Yeah, so we should probably check that. I'm just curious about that. If that's a deed restriction or just somehow that rule came up. Because if you look on their if you go to Scenic Hudson's website, it actually says no dogs allowed in Irvington.
But the board did approve money for design.
Yeah, for design.
To explore one in Middle Memorial Park. So that's
actually the reason Memorial Park seemed like a good idea for us as well. It's right off the aqueduct, and it's kind of centrally located in town. It's close to Main Street, and it seemed like a good idea. So that money's already been approved for the design.
That money
in the capital budget now.
That money was approved for the design.
It's capital budget for next year.
It's in the capital budget for next year. Yes.
2024.
But we don't know right, and partly because we don't know what the final cost estimate is. So the number that's there is really just a placeholder. We're waiting for the final design.
Yep, but
And then are we ever going to consider allowing dogs in the park?
I think that's a separate conversation from the dog park. But yeah, I think that's going to come up again and again. The next one is a letter from Gloria Leahy. I imagine you received a lot of email complaints about various issues happening in the village, but not many thank you messages. So I'm writing to express my gratitude. Always dreaded Fridays because the loud gas-powered leaf blowers used by landscapers at Irvington Garden Co-op apartments on a weekly visit. But yesterday was the first time they did not use them. Finally, it was so peaceful without the landscapers using them to remove pollen and grass clippings around. So I want to say thank you. It's Gloria Leahy on 20 Broadway. Then we have 2 other letters that pertain to the public hearing that we're going to have, so I'll hold those over for that. That being said, I will now open it up to public comment for anything that's not on the agenda. Please.
I'd like to talk about the speeding on Meadow Way, but I think what's best to do is talk about the good things first, and the good things were that the town did install those 2 stop signs on Harriman. Since their installment, I have not been passed. I have seen no cars on the wrong side of the road. I have not been passed at the stop sign when someone's crossing in front of me and they almost get hit. That has not happened since you guys installed them. So, well done. Also, to that point, and this is important because this is not an anti-cop diatribe, the police, when my son almost died, awesome job. EMTs, awesome job. Fire, when my house caught on fire, awesome job. So, all good things. That being said, there's a huge blind spot, and that's just the traffic in general. And I documented 41 miles an hour on my 15-mile-an-hour road. It's a dead end. There's 13 kids that live on it. My front step is 33 feet from the road. So, all that being said, I called up the police, and that's my 5th phone call, 5 visits, and this is my 5th time down here. That's 15 things I've done, all documentable. So is the 41 miles an hour on my street, also documented digitally, awesome camera. So when I said I got 41 miles an hour, someone was tripling the speed limit on my block. The response was, and again, this pains me to say this again, there's another first responder, what's the speed limit? And I said, it's 15 miles an hour. And he said, is it posted? And I said, yes, it is. And he said, what color is the sign? At which point I realized what he was doing, which was telling me it's only a suggestion if it's orange, which of course I do know. That was not really an acceptable answer. Because I would get in the car with any one of you who drive up and down Meadow Way at 25 miles an hour, and we know if you post 25, that means 31 minimum. Doing 25, doing anything over 15 is more reprehensible. I had a lady triple the speed limit. He has his daughters down the block. One of his daughter's friends is crawling around the car, playing hide and go seek. And the 17-ton cargo truck with multi-axles is coming down the block, not doing 15 miles an hour, by the way. Bouncing around, winding dead end road. And this girl's crawling around the car. I'm 100 yards away, throwing up in my mouth again, because I know what happens. I got 20 years on the job. I see too many of them. So the next day, what's out in my lawn? There's a groundhog. Groundhog's this big, squashed in the middle of the road. And you could say, Aaron, groundhogs are small mammals that make poor decisions. Do you know what else lives on that block that's a small mammal that makes poor decisions? Any of the 11 kids. Savvy? Now, like I said, 15 visits altogether, 5 times here, 5 times to the precinct, and 5 phone calls, all documented. Now I brought friends. I'm not coming down here anymore. What I will do is I have a significant voice in New York City. If anything ever happens, and I swear to God to you guys, this is so true, I will use my significant loudmouth. I will use my wife's significant loudmouth, and we will tell every story imaginable about me coming down here and screaming at the top of the lungs, up to the point being disrespectful to the cops, which I never would be. The answer can't be that it's 25 miles an hour, nothing we can do. It's reprehensible. I'm telling you, I see 12 close calls a year. That's all I gotta say. I'm not alone. I'm not one crazy person. I've got friends.
Doesn't make you not crazy.
Can I have your
I don't
name?
think she's convinced. I think she thinks I'm crazy.
Can I add?
Can I have your name for the record? I'm sorry.
My name is Aaron Stock.
Thank you.
My name's Adam Weiss, live next door to Aaron. And in truth, when we lived there 10 years, there's something about this street. It's a long dead end, it's straight. There are some houses at one end that seem to have a lot of deliveries and construction. And the truth is that the kids, to Aaron's point, run across the street constantly. And it is frightening because the trucks and some residents drive very fast down the street. I don't know what it is about the street that invites going 40 miles an hour down the dead end street one. But we came because it's a concern that we all share. And fortunately, no one has been hurt. But if there's anything that the village can do to try to help bring the speeding down on our street, I think it could really prevent an accident. It is frightening.
I mean, we do have a dedicated traffic officer now.
I spoke to him.
And I'm guessing, you know, I mean, to me, typically a dead end street wouldn't be the usual speedway. So, you know, I'll personally ask him if he can spend time there.
I can speak to that. He spent time in a marked car halfway down the block. And, you know, when you have science experiments, you automatically affect the experiment. But when you do the experiment in a marked police car, you affect that experiment.
We can also put, we have, you know, we put all over the town, we have things that collect speed. So we can put that there as well. And if the average speed is, you know, 35 miles an hour on that street, which does, again, who the heck's speeding down to a dead end street? It's bizarre.
25 is too fast. Right?
But the problem is like, by law, we can't set it below 25. We actually looked into this several years ago.
Really, because there's a bunch of 50 mile an hour.
You can only do it in a school zone. We actually,
What about Station Road?
we
Downtown.
we actually
School
said it's Station Road, we expanded it to a school zone because it's close enough to within a, I don't know, quarter mile, whatever it is, to Dow's Lane. We kind of did it, we're walking the line on Station Road, but we actually, it's New York state law, you can't set it below 25, which I don't necessarily agree with, but, you know, it's annoying. I find that very frustrating myself
What's
because
the distance between the school?
I don't know, I don't remember off the top of my head, but if you can get Meadow Way within.
It is. High school's right behind Meadow Way. In fact, that's why a lot of cars goes down there, because they take the kids to school.
So if it's that close, then we can make it a true 15, a school zone. We can look into that for sure. But if it's not, then, you know, then it's still, it will be 25. Because we try to do it, because, you know, even Sunnyside Lane to us should be less than 25. You know, Station Road obviously should be less than 25. Like if people can't stay in the road at 20, you shouldn't be going faster than that. But we ran into that when we were trying to, change it ourselves. Even Main Street, we've tried to lower, which we were able to do because they have Main Street School, but technically the very top and the very bottom, we couldn't do. So, but I'd be happy to both talk to the chief and to the traffic officer to see if something they can do. I think the other thing, if those efforts don't help, with a dead end street, most of the downsides of, speed humps aren't an issue because it's not, you don't need fire trucks to respond somewhere through a major road. 'Cause usually that's where people speed on a major road. So you can't, it does slow down times. It hurts with plowing, things like that. But if it's a dead end street that all of you guys want speed humps on, then that's something we can explore as well.
What constitutes all of us?
There's actually, I think it was, I remember we did this once before. There was, I think it was like 75% of them, something like that. So seems like maybe not the people at the end who like to go fast, but but it's but that to me is if we can't do it through enforcement and through education, then we'll have to resort to that. So
Yeah, no, I've done some education, hugely respectful.
yeah, and what we found, like we've had this in other neighborhoods. Usually they're not dead end streets, but it's almost always people that live there. And I'm sure in a dead end street, it's probably 99% people who live there, which is always bizarre to me. That, especially when your neighbors say, hey, can you slow down?
No, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That's what you said. You
Yeah.
said it. And, in fairness to those individuals, the more reasonable ones did slow down.
Yeah.
So,
It's part of delivery trucks. It's like,
Delivery
like
trucks.
Amazon, it's never the same guy. UPS guy's pretty good. It's the same guy, same route. But the Amazon,
Yeah.
one of the 5 trucks a day that drives by.
I tell you this.
And you ask them to slow down, they'll stop, and then they'll peel out as soon as they get back.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them block almost 2 lanes on Broadway, just stopping to deliver something.
The right side or the wrong side
On
of it.
yeah, that's true. They just could pull anywhere. They don't park, they stop. But yeah, so we'll definitely pass that on.
So that's what what's the protocol for the speed bump then?
Well, let's see if we can, let's give it some time to see if we can do maybe some unmarked or something on the street. And we'll put out the speed cameras as well. Anybody else? All right, so let's move on to the consent agenda. Anyone have any questions on the consent agenda? If not, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next up, approval of proposal with Kelly Deer Management to conduct a deer density study.
I think Joe's here to,
Take care. Take care, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Joe and CJ are here to discuss this one.
Good evening, everyone. I have CJ with me in case there's any questions. As you may remember, a couple of months ago, the Woods Committee came in front of you to talk about the concern that they have for the number of deer in the Irvington Woods. It's not only the woods, as most people know and most homeowners know. There's a problem in the village. As you politely listened to us, the one thing you said to us before we came back is we needed to make sure we had more information for you. And to have a better understanding of the number of deer would be helpful. So the Deer Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Irvington Woods Committee, have been meeting regularly, and they've identified an individual with outstanding credentials who has presented to us, has met with CJ multiple times, has met with myself, and we're asking that we are able to use money from the Nature Center Trust and Agency account to pay for his services to conduct a study. I think you all received a copy of the proposal, and we're just here in case there are any questions. If not, we'd like permission to enter an agreement with him and have him get started. CJ will be working side by side with him. The Woods Committee, and in particular, the Deer Management Committee, of which Charlotte Bin is also a member, will be there, so.
Personally, I think this is really important because I think we all anecdotally think it's really bad, and we can get the numbers of what overpopulation means, and we think we might be, 20x those numbers, but we don't have the numbers. We have
Right.
kind of our eyes and our feelings.
And you
So-
made that clear, and it was a great point, and we learned a lot the first time. And we can't look at a step 2 or a phase 2 until we also have that understanding of what is actually going there. What's quite concerning is the individual who's pretty much an expert up and down the East Coast stated to us at our meeting last week that our woods may be the worst he's ever seen in terms of understory and condition. He's amazed by the condition of it, which is sad for us because of all the work we're doing.
Yeah.
But we continue to move forward, and this should be helpful information for the entire community.
Yeah,
So,
and I also think it was relatively not a ton of money. Like, this is a pretty big undertaking. It's a big area to do, so I was,
well, it's a good way to get started. The money in the Nature Center account is money that's either come from fundraisers, donations, or other means, so it would not have to come out of our operating budget, which we prefer, so that we can still plan to do the things we want to do there. We think it's a very good use of that money, and the committee, the Irvington Woods Committee, 100% supported that we asked to use the money from the DNA account. Any questions?
questions on this?
CJ, can I just ask, what exact data are we going to be getting from this, and how do you
Sure.
plan to use that data along with other data that we could
Yeah, that's
use
a
to
great question.
have numbers?
So this is the Weckler method. So it's using camera traps that run continuously for 28 days, from the end of September through, from the end of August through September. And so you're looking at density through buck antler count. So you can differentiate buck antlers from other male deer. And you kind of quantify that with the does, the fawns, and then that is your baseline number for that year, that season. And now there are different methods you can do. This one's cheaper, and it serves its purpose. More expensive one, which is a flyover drone, which could well be over $6,000, gives you a one-time read of the woods, whereas this will be running for 28 days consecutively. So it gives us a better perspective of what's going in our woods day and night. And as Mayor Smith pointed out, it gives us kind of a more, not perfect, but a better conclusive idea of the density of deer in Irvington Woods Park.
So are these studies being done in other sort of neighboring locales so we can have a comparison that's a valid number for us? And
Sure, yeah.
neighbors?
It's a great question. So T-Town, sorry.
Before he answers the rest, we are way ahead of the surrounding communities. CJ will talk about some of the established places. As far as other communities go, they're not anywhere near where we are in terms of progress on dealing with this issue. So it's hard for us to tell you what they're doing when I don't think they're anywhere near at the level we are. So, sorry, talk about TJ.
That's great. But Dr. Lunke, that's a great question, because the Weckler method, that's the method that's kind of used throughout most municipalities within Westchester and New York State, Pennsylvania. Just because it's a long running program, it's cost effective, and it gives you a better kind of overview snapshot. And places like T-Town, which is a model for us, Bedford, use it as well. Same with the research site at Fordham in northern Westchester. Daytona.
Thanks, CJ.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else? Good. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, I'm sorry, I had a question. With the Zoom, it's slower. So to be clear, do we have any numbers for Hastings or Dobbs or Ardsley or anywhere else near Irvington?
Dobbs will not have any. Hastings, I don't know if they've done any number counting. So I think, again, we're on our own right now. They've done some work in Hastings, but studying the density, I do not think is one of the things they've accomplished. We can double check on that for you, but we know from the grants we're writing too that we're, again, ahead of where some of the other communities are with the issues in the woods surrounding all of us.
I might actually mention to the village officials committee that, for less than $1,500, you might get a good sense. I think it's pretty valuable. They might be interested as well. So,
Yeah. You know, we'll also send out a listserv to all of our rec colleagues and ask if any other community has any updated data, which might be interesting to see. I'm not sure how much we'll get back. Might get some from the northern part of the county, but we'll take a look to see who else has some back information on it.
We are looking at other preserves that are similar to our woods.
Well, the preserves are the ones that we looked at that have had success. Wasn't T-Town one of the ones with the, T-Town, we saw a chart from T-Town on when they finally started taking action, but we don't know what action to take. Let's make that clear. We have to understand what's there because we can't put a final plan together until we can all have the same information in front of us. So we're not trying to jump the horse here. We're trying to get more information on the woods, on the dare, talk to professionals, have CJ work with all the surrounding communities with the help of people like the Woods Committee. You know, we just keep gathering information, and we hope sometime, maybe the beginning of next year, we'll have a real formal request for you to look at. But it's not going to be before that. There's still too much studying to do. Mitch, you okay with that?
That I appreciate the answer. Thank you. I mean, it's no secret I'm skeptical of this whole thing. And one of the many problems I have is it can't be an Irvington solution. I mean, the deer don't know borders. It's our little piece of a much bigger piece of land where the deer are moving and living and stuff. And if no one else is doing this, I don't really see the value of doing something only in Irvington. It has to be, I think, a multi-village effort to know what the situation is.
We hope to be the leader. We hope to set the standard and get everyone to want to come on board to follow us. Someone has to do that, and it's not there right now. So we think it needs to come from us, and that's what we're attempting to do.
And I think, Mitch, I agree with you on management of it, but I think measuring our issue, I think, is important now. So I would have loved to have this from 10 years ago and 20 years ago
Right.
to see how it's changed. And if we don't do this now, we're not going to have the data. So to me, for $1,500 or $1,400, to me, it makes sense to get the data. So
Bless you.
if we start to manage in 5 years or 10 years or 30 years, we'll have a baseline that we're going to actually have some information on.
All of the river towns are interested in what we're doing. They're all watching us.
We're all watching.
Well, thanks for being responsive to our
Sure.
request for you
Yeah.
to get some hard data.
It was a good experience for the board committee to come in front of you because they understood what you guys have to take under account. It's not just what we think. So we're trying to get you that information. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Resolved to approve the proposal with Kelly Dealer Management to conduct a deer density study in the Irvington Woods Park and to authorize the village administrator to execute said proposal. I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
So even the study of how bad the problem is, you don't want to do it. I'm curious.
I
about
just
that.
think it has to be a multi-village thing. I'm not supporting anything in Irvington alone.
But this isn't managing it. This is finding out how bad our problem is, and our problem is our problem, in my opinion. That's.
But they move
Bring it up.
around. It may not. Yeah,
But they do move around.
that's how I feel.
How many deer we have in per mile in our woods. I mean, this isn't saying we're going to try to manage our woods, because I don't think that that's necessarily a good idea either. But anyway, we don't have to debate this now. But continuation of a public hearing requesting a special permit for adaptive uses of a historic building at 67 North Broadway, also known as Villa Lawaro.
Good evening, Mayor Smith, members of the Board of Trustees, Jennifer Gray from the law firm of Keen and Bean here on behalf of Villa Lawaro LLC, owner of property at 67 North Broadway. I'm joined tonight by the owner's representative, William James, Stephanie Reinhardt from Tilly Architecture, also George Alessandrados from my office. We are here tonight for the continued public hearing on our application for a special use permit for the adaptive reuse of Villa Lawaro. Public hearing was opened on May 15th, continued to June 5th, and then also tonight. At our last meeting, we discussed that we were going to meet with the neighbors. The owner, Richelieu Dennis, and William James did do that after your last meeting on June 5th. I think the main takeaways that the owner took from that meeting were that there were two sort of primary, I'll call them primary requests, and those are also echoed in letters that you received from the neighbors. And that is a prohibition on all amplified noise outside of the building, and more information on programming. So I'd like to address those two issues and then also quickly touch on some of the other comments that were made in letters that you received from the public since the last meeting. With respect to noise, we've outlined this in our letter to your board from last week. We cannot agree on an absolute prohibition on amplified noise outside of the building. We feel that that's unreasonable, particularly given the professional acoustical study that was presented to the board done by AKRF, which showed that we can have low-level amplified noise outside of the property, outside of the building, that will not result in a significant deviation from the existing ambient noise levels. We recognize that this is essentially, it's a residential neighborhood, right? We recognize that. It's also on Route 9, one of the busiest and most trafficked roads in the village of Irvington. We also recognize that the village has a noise ordinance that we are obviously have to comply with and are fully committed to complying with. And the fact that the special permit conditions require that give us a really, really strong self-interest in making sure that we do comply with the village's noise ordinance, because the risk is a really, it's a really, what's the word I'm looking for? Severe risk on our part. If we do deviate from that, we could be at risk of losing the special permit, losing what we've been fighting to do at the property. So that is our position on the noise, that we cannot agree to a prohibition on amplified noise outside of the building. With respect to programs, we would refer the board and the public to our statement of use that we've presented previously, along with some of the promotional flyers and programs that we submitted back in 2021 that just gave sort of a sample of the types of educational programs that the Institute plans to hold. At the end of the day, that is the bread and butter of what is proposed here: educational programming for women of color entrepreneurs. That could include, seminars, workshops on topics such as financial literacy, marketing, and other business-related items. The statement of use also talks about events, sure. Events being, and these are just a couple of examples that we've discussed in the past. Obviously, we can't come up with a whole comprehensive list, but certainly any event would have to fall within the parameters of what's required under the special permit provisions of your code, which is educational, cultural, and historic facilities. But just some examples we've discussed in the past have been collaborations with area organizations such as the Irvington Historical Society, hosting an event sponsored by the Historical Society to educate the public about Madam C.J. Walker. Events with the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts. We've had requests for book signings, right, at Villa Luaro. So it's a prominent site, right? It's well known. It's a site where folks seek out, the venue as, as related to the type of, prominence that they'd like to shine upon certain missions and purposes. In addition to that, fundraising is obviously an important part of keeping Villa Luaro in a preserved and restored condition. So we anticipate that there would be a limited number of fundraisers at the property, and as well as tours, which we've outlined certain limitations on the hours of operation for the tours. Those would be on an appointment basis and limited to the terms in the statement of use. So I also want to quickly touch on some of the other points that were made in some of the correspondence that you received, including a comment about the easement that is currently on the property. We talked about this back in 2021 when we were first before the board. There is an easement on the property that relates to the preservation and restoration of Villa Luaro. It has certain limitations in it. We talked previously about the requirement that we do open up the site for public access for a number of days per year. I believe that was raised by one of the board members back in 2021. And we also talked about the restriction that currently it is to be used as a single-family home unless the National Trust approves a change of use. There's standards that they apply for whether that change of use is consistent with the preservation of the site. We've been in, I shouldn't say we, because not my office, but Tilly Architecture is in regular communication with the trust. Mr. James just spoke to the trust legal counsel this week and did confirm that the trust prefers that local action happen first before they would move forward with approving their change of use, but they are aware of what's being proposed. The other item, building code and fire code safety requirements. Currently in the draft conditions for the special permit, you do have a requirement that we must comply with all applicable building code and safety code, fire code requirements. We obviously agree with that. We would not get a certificate of occupancy otherwise from your building inspector. Tilly Architecture did meet with Ed Marin about 2 weeks or so ago and did review floor plans with him. That is a work in progress. Tilly Architecture is continuing to engage with the building inspector, but obviously we cannot receive a certificate of occupancy for the proposed special permit use without satisfying all of the required fire code and building code requirements. So I just want to make sure that is, that we understand that. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have or hear further comments from the public.
Sure.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Reading from your letter to us, first of all, at the end of last meeting, I wished you guys good luck, and I'm sorry that it seems that you were not able to come to any compromises.
Yes.
And in reading your letter to the board, you speak of the meeting with Mr. Dennis and Mr. James and the neighbors, and I'm reading from your letter, as we understand it, the neighbors are primarily interested in seeing, one, a prohibition or limitation on amplified sound. And then in your response, you say that you cannot agree to a prohibition on amplified sound. And my answer, and your justification is that our noise ordinance, was enough to maintain things. Our noise ordinance was purposefully left the way it is by the previous board in situations where it's been called into effect, particularly with the event space at the waterfront, where neighbors had a lot of complaints about noise, and Brian and I were down there with our telephones and measuring decibel levels, and and what we found, and through Marianne's guidance, she can't really use a decibel number. One, because of the enforcement of that becomes very difficult. Two, because the feeling of noise is different than the number of decibels that you get. So what I'm really getting to is I'm sorry that you weren't able to at least come to some compromise on perhaps a limitation of amplification, perhaps hours that are slightly shortened from the hours of the event itself. Because again, not that the noise ordinance isn't written the way it is, because that's how we want it at the moment.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult thing to enforce, and to say that you're going to rely on that for enforcement could become a problem over the course of the year. Complaints over an extended period of time about the noise might have an effect also on the 1 year, review of the special permit.
Sure.
So,
Yep. Yeah, no, understood. And, I guess I should have written in the letter that we couldn't agree to a further limitation, because we are already including limitations on noise, on amplified noise. Outside, we have a cutoff time, which I believe there is a provision in your code that has a cutoff time for amplified noise, as I think it's 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock. So
well, your events don't run that long.
Exactly, and we're agreeing to cut off the amplified sound even before the events end. So we already have incorporated some limitations on amplified noise
I don't
outdoors.
recall seeing that limitation.
I think it's this one here.
Yeah, it's number 11, special permit to use there.
It's not as long as ours.
Right, so the amplification is ending an hour before the event is
Yeah.
during the week.
Yeah, and certainly, for us to agree to a prohibition on all amplified noise,
Yeah, no, I-
that would really hamper our use of the property.
So I think, to me, there's basically three hurdles you guys have. One is the special permit, one's the easement issue, and then the C of O. So to me, it's like, the chicken and the egg type thing. It's like, if you get the special permit, doesn't mean anything without the other two, and the other two. So it's kind of like, we have to, in my mind, we have to look at this kind of, and not think about those two because they have to be worked out on their own. So to me, it's like kind of it's not a moot point. It's a very important point, but it doesn't really affect our decision. So that's kind of how I was looking at those things. Yeah, I think the good thing is we're down to kind of two issues. And my hope is that we can have, common sense on both sides that let it work. If we can't put it into the special permit, I think to me, the biggest thing is, as you've mentioned, is it's a 1-year special permit. So if you decide to have loud music on Fridays, you're not going to get renewed. So there's the potential for a year of neighbors being very angry at this board. But I don't think you're in this for 1 year. So to me, it wouldn't make any sense. And then the second thing, the concern about the size and frequency of events, which I think is probably a legitimate concern when you're kind of going into something. It's not like, to me, you've run this program for 36 years and now you're just moving the location. So you know that in October you have an event on the 15th, and so to me, I think there's a little bit of uncertainty about exactly what this is. Like, we've had kind of similar kind of generalizations of uses, which I think, I think the neighbors they agree with 95% of all the uses, just when it gets to the events. And I think if you knew you always had 4 events every year, or 3 events every year, or 9 events every year, you'd be able to, work on that better. So I think the only thing that can kind of bridge that is communication. And I think one good thing is that the neighbors, there's a letter signed by 36 neighbors, so they're fairly well organized. So I don't think it'd be hard to be able to disseminate things. And, to me, my advice would be, in that first year, when you're gonna be under the microscope, over communicate. We're gonna have an event you're probably not gonna see, but we wanna let you know what's going on because it's a really cool book signing for, whatever. I think that type of thing will be the thing that kind of gains back the trust that was lost with the fashion show. And I think the only way to make this move forward and work successfully would be that, because I think that, there's just no other way. There's too many unknowns in the actual programming right now, to me, that, again, if this was going to be a one-time special permit and it was done, there's no way I could agree to that. The 1-year thing, I think, is interesting. And then who knows, like, once we approve this, it's not even 1 year until they get the C of O anyway. And I'm guessing you want to get the C of O to get the easement issue. So, to me, when this actually starts the clock ticking, I'm not 100% sure either. Hopefully you can get it done quickly for your sake, but, I'm not sure about that. But, again, to me, the amplified sound issue, my advice would be to use it as little as possible. And I think that I don't think I have to tell you guys that. I think that, while still having your events, they're not, it's not like you're going to be a concert venue. It's going to be background noise for the most part, or maybe, speeches or things like that, but to relatively small groups that don't need a lot of amplification. So I think that if you do it right, I think that in 5 years, everyone will say, this is unbelievable. I can't believe it took that long to get it approved. Or I could see in a year, something goes wrong and that's it, or you're back to square one. So I think a lot of this is just going to depend on how you guys do this eventually. The special permit can only put in so many caveats. And if you said, it'd be a half hour earlier, I don't think that's going to make things better or worse. It's going to be, your awareness of the concerns of the neighbors, which I think they've made very clear. I think you've addressed them, you've acknowledged them. So, it's not like, with the fashion show, I don't think any of us knew the size, including you guys, didn't know the size or the scale of it. So it just boom. But I think now everyone's super aware. So there's no kind of like, my bad on the next one. So I feel like this can work because everyone here will work together and make it work, because I think everybody wants your programming to work. And we know that the house is key to a lot of that. And we know that the house is a very special place for so many reasons. And what better way than to kind of have the same use from 100 years ago kind of be, reinvented and used again, that the neighbors are all excited about it. That rather than worrying about too much noise, every time someone comes to visit, they're going to talk about, hey, do you know what they're doing in Madam C.J. Walker's house? And first, who Madam C.J. Walker is. So I think people are getting to know. But now listen to the next chapter that's happening right here in Irvington, that I'm so glad my house is right next to it. And I see, and I think, honestly, I know the Harshers pretty well. I think they're very reasonable people. And I think that they'll be happy to work with you guys when this all kind of shows itself as working well. And I think that can be, again, it could be a selling point that this is next door rather than a fear. And I think the only thing we can do is give it time and those types of things. So I know I've been talking forever now, but it's, but sorry. But I just felt like, I feel like we keep coming up to a point where eventually we're going to have to, ask the neighbors to trust you to do the right thing. And I'm pretty confident that, talking to Mr. James many times, that you guys understand the concerns, and you're not going to make those mistakes. And I think the problem is it's very hard to put that on paper. So some of it's going to have to be a little bit of a leap of faith. With the overall parachute for us, if we were wrong, is in a year, you got to be before the board again. My hope is that, in a year, everything's going so well that you send it in and it's almost rubber stamped. I think that's everyone's dreams. I don't think the neighbors, as much as they'd like to hear me talk forever, I can do that off air. And actually, I won't even be here. But so we got to come to a point where we kind of take a chance and get as much as we can in here. And the fact that I think everyone's on the page with what the two remaining issues are: the number of events, the type of events, which I don't think we can get clarity on, even if we wait another 6 months. And then it's really outdoor amplification, which I understand your point that you need some. I understand their point. You need less than you probably think you need. And that's, I think that's where I am right now on this.
I guess what I would say is, I think for me, I really want this to work, right? I think it is a shame that I lived in this town for many, many years and had no idea that house was even there. I do also think, I remember Leila Bundles having a conversation, and maybe she said it here, or maybe she said it at dedication, which is that music was a big part of that house. So I personally, I understand the concerns about noise, but I also think that I would assume that when you have events, and I went to a fundraiser there was certainly music, right? So I think music and amplification to me is a little bit of is it a concern? Yes. Is it a part of events? Yes. But I think what the neighbors, if I live right next to it, right, what I would be most concerned about is reasonableness of it, right? And I think that we've had this conversation so many times that I think you understand that, right? We've talked about it. I'm sure you've had conversations with them. We've already, I said this before, I don't think it helps to keep going backwards. I think we have to move forward because everyone is saying the same thing. We really support the mission of this organization. So in my view, if we really believe in the mission, then we have to move forward and we have to have a little bit of faith. And again, it's not even that much faith because it's a 1-year permit. So if everything goes poorly, then you're not going to get the permit extended. So to me, I think we have to stand behind what we keep saying, which is we believe in the mission and we have to help make this happen.
And I also think that if I think most of these events are not going to be you find out on Thursday that's happening Saturday. So it's going to be a month in advance. And if you tell the neighbors, hey, by the way, next Saturday from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, we're going to have 50 people coming, then they'll know that, you know what, maybe at 2 o'clock is not when I want to be outside or whatever. Hopefully it's not it's not going to be a problem at all, but if they're aware of it, or they can even just say the first time, I'm going to sit out on my lawn and see how loud this thing is. I mean, I just think that that's The more communication, the better also, because there's no surprises.
I mean, I would assume a lot of your programming is gonna be in-house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, otherwise you would just want an empty lot.
Exactly. So, I understand the portion about having faith, but I just want to reiterate that we've been there 5 years now. It's been one event that we've had a complaint. We've had other items that has happened that we've had, like Jennifer has already mentioned, we've had tours there. We've had, film shoots. We've had a bunch of things there with 0 complaints. And we've made a lot of compromise over the last 2 years from our first permit proposal in terms of the number of people on site. We've addressed the issue with the noise. We are below the limits of what the village code is. So that's another compromise that we've made. So we're doing everything in our power to listen to the neighbors. This process has been going on for 2 years now. I hate to say this, but we've had to endure some really offensive comments at some points, and we have not addressed those openly. Having faith has to go both ways, and hopefully, we can bring this to a close and then move forward over the next several years.
Yeah, and there definitely were some comments that I thought were so absurd they shouldn't be responded to, but when I do
Right.
that, it almost seems sometimes like you're saying it's okay.
Exactly.
The fact that you're gonna have programming there and I'm now gonna have to lock my doors was the one that jumps off the page to me, was
Yeah.
completely inappropriate. So I'm sure there were others that I'm not remembering. That one was the one that
I can give you a few.
I was mad at myself. I didn't say, I didn't
Right.
respond to that one because I think I was a little speechless, I think, but.
I think we all were.
Yeah, so it's, and I don't think that, I haven't heard that from the neighbors I've spoken to, those absurd things. I guess that person was actually a neighbor that I'm talking about, but that hasn't been the driving fact, the driving voice for most of the neighbors for me. I think that was a bit of an outlier. And, I think the overall sense in this, again, is that people are excited to have that house used for something like this versus like if you wanted to be like a bed and breakfast for profit or something. But I haven't heard, even the people that were worried about noise and traffic and all those things say, they usually started with, we support the mission, right? So, I agree with you. There were definitely some ugly things said that were unacceptable. Anybody else? I do have the letters. Most of the people on the letters are here, not the ones that from Hollywood.
Can I just say,
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because I do want to address that, and I think sitting on this board, I do, and sitting on the other side of it, I heard so many comments as well, and I think that I think we should, like, as a village, like, that is not how most people here feel. And as a resident, when I hear those things, I'm also, just like embarrassed, basically, embarrassed that people feel so comfortable saying that and have no thought about what's coming out of their mouth. But I do think that it is like, it's a very important thing to have that house come to prominence again and be used. And so I know sitting in my seat, I want us to make sure that this happens successfully, and I think it will. I have faith. I have a lot of faith that it's going to be fine.
So again, I have 2 pieces of correspondence. I can either read them or if anybody wants to summarize them. It's up to you. Read them?
I think there was another letter that came in today.
Oh, yeah, typically if they don't come in by Friday at noon, we put them on the next meeting. Because we needed to have a cutoff at some point, and we'd like to publish this at least 24 hours in advance. So I'll start with the longer, or the letter signed, I think 36 by my count. Dear Mayor Smith, members of the Board of Trustees, we are the residents of the Village of Irvington and neighbors at 67 North Broadway. We are writing in regards to the special permit application that has been presented to the village. There are 2 main concerns shared by the neighbors: events and outdoor application of music and sound. Number 1, events. We have concerns about the size and frequency of events as proposed in the special permit application, as well as the frequency of any proposed events with more than 115 people on site. Can events, as they are being proposed, be defined to include type, i.e. seminar, pitch, competition, graduation, wedding, etc., frequency, size, number of attendees, location or property, indoor, outdoor, carriage house. Number 2, outdoor application of music and sound. We are opposed to the use of outdoor speakers that would be used to amplify music and sound. We have the aspects of events and programs would potentially be a noise nuisance. We value the peace and tranquility of our neighborhood. We kindly request that you carefully consider these concerns as you evaluate the special permit application. The neighbors of Villa Lawaro, I will read them if everyone gives me a break if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Emily Berry, Joseph Berry, Peter Boudoir, Simona Bouderi, Emily Clinton, Jesse Clinton, Sarah Costa, Fiona DeLuna, John DeLuna, Michael Douglas, Jason Franks, Terry Franks, Eli Hollowell, Erica Hollowell, Judd Harsher, Kathy Harsher, Melanie Haas-Kahn, Maggie Cadro, Ryan Cadro, David A. Kaplan, Glenn Cashin, Melinda Cashin, Young Kwan, Carlene Lesser, Guy Lesser, John McLaughlin, Kevin McLaughlin, David Phillips, Joseph Rancic, Renata Rancic, Justin Rispar, Jessica Rubin, Lillian Romano, Jay Schoenfarber, Tammy Schoenfarber, Judith Ullman, and Catherine Zeta-Jones. That was the first letter. Harsher, do you want me to read yours as well?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff's been addressed.
Yeah, well, it's not that long. Our names are Judd and Kathy Harsher. We live at 65 North Broadway, just south of 67 North Broadway. We have previously written to the village board regarding our concerns about the special permit application, Villa Lawaro in 2021, May 9th, 2023, and addressed the board on June 5th, 2023. Our concerns regarding events and application of sound as part of the special permit application remain intact and reiterate our previously expressed thoughts in our letters and comments to the boards. We recently brought to our attention that the easement at 67 North Broadway from the Greenberg Township that control numbers detailed are effective and on file. Easements are with the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the United States grantee. We want to bring to the attention of the mayor and the village board of trustees, if not already known, within the easement states 3.1 conditional rights requiring approval by grantee K. Grantor shall change the use of property and other use other than single-family residential without grantee's prior approval as provided herein. Grantee must determine that the proposed use, one, does not impair the significant conservation and preservation values of the property, and two, does not conflict with the purpose of the easement. I was able to speak with Claire Jones of the National Trust in the easement office on June 16th. She was checking to see if the National Trust has approved an easement modification to Villa Lawaro as a property other than single-family residential. This approval is not in place for use other than single-family use. We asked the village board to postpone any decision as relates to special permit application for adaptive reuse to the National Trust as confirmed. As relates to 24.8C Village Code Special Use Permit for Adaptive Reuse of Historical Buildings, request the village board revisit the law specifically to events. Since the word event is not included in our law, our request of the village clearly outline criteria around events as an amendment to the law. As such, type, size, frequency, rental of property. We would like to request that the village board hold off adaptive reuse approvals as relates to events until an amendment to the law is included. As mentioned previously in the comments to the village board on June 5th, it is our view that the Villa Lawaro first safely satisfy conditions needed like fire safety provisions for a building certificate of occupancy, a berm parking plan, and the ownership of the single proposed offsite parking, and now confirmation from the National Trust on other than single family use prior to the village approval of adaptive reuse of 67 North Broadway. That's Judd and Kathy Harsher. Anyone else like to speak?
I could just.
Sure.
Regarding the letter that I understand came in today, I won't read it because I understand that it came in past your deadline, but I just want to mention that it wasn't support, and they spoke against any further restrictions, and it was from Sarah Parganos at 90 Fargo Lane.
It's not always reading the last names. Please, if you don't mind, just so people at home can hear him, and Mitch in his fancy lounge at the airport.
E. Laser, 6 Fargo Lane, 2 houses west of the villa. I've lived here for 28 years and I've been a very proud neighbor for 28 years. So absolutely support, as you said, 95% of what's in the request. I had 2 questions for the owner during our Zoom meeting. One was, do events also mean weddings from people from the outside? Now, in the letter from the attorney, that doesn't seem to be the case. So I would like that to be confirmed, that it's really only events that are part of the programming by the foundation and not somebody from the outside, maybe a big donor who can suddenly organize something where then again, they're not in control of what's going on. My second question was with the amplified noise, does that also mean a DJ who would play loud music? We have no problem with background music. We have no problem with an MC who would lead whatever the event is. But I would have a problem with a DJ who would play music that we can hear in our backyard. That would be the same at 8 o'clock in the evening as it would be at 10 o'clock in the evening. That would just be a nuisance.
If I could just answer the part
Yeah,
about
the weddings.
Yeah, the way the special permit reads, it says that it can only be used for the permitted uses detailed in this Appendix A. And Appendix A deals, lists the permitted uses as tours, workshops, and meetings, office space, private tours, and events. And events limited to the purposes of the thing which were in the beginning of it for educational and, let me see, there was more specific language. It has to be consistent with the mission and purpose. In the very beginning of it, of this Appendix A, says it would be used for programming from traditionally underserved women, includes training on topics of financial literacy, building, planning, marketing, community engagement. But the events thing also says that it could also be used for fundraisers or events that relate to the charitable purpose of the organization. That's the main language. So that would be limited. And I suppose it's conceivable you can have a wedding, but it can't be an event space. Like not an event space like for weddings and big parties and stuff like that, except related to their educational charitable purpose. Okay.
I'll address one part of it since you've already addressed the event section. So we are, regardless of how the space is used, we are always in control of programming events going forward. So either myself or someone on my staff will always be there, so.
Good evening, Dan Polay, 3 Fargo Lane. My property is directly across from the applicant's property. The letter that was written in comments with the 36 folks, my signature is not on that letter, and it's for one primary reason, which is I think that a complete prohibition on outdoor amplification of music at this location or any location in the village is unreasonable. So that's my personal opinion. And that's why I didn't sign the letter. However, I do think that there are legitimate concerns as relates to this because of what occurred previously with the fashion show. And so I said a bit of this when the hearing opened, but I'll reiterate this. I think if there are questions as far as ambiguity of the number of events or the type of events or where parking is to be allowed or not allowed, I think specificity in the permit needs to be there. The reason being is because when we come back here in a year, after the permit is presumably issued and when the permit comes back up for renewal, it should be cut and dried as to whether or not the applicant complied. And we should not have a lot of interpretation or ambiguity in terms of the number of events. Just simply cap the number of events or state explicitly where parking will and won't be allowed. And then that way, it will be very easy to tell whether or not the applicant has complied or not, so that next year, when we come back, we don't need to have a big debate. The evidence will be there as to whether or not they complied, and then we can move forward accordingly.
Dave.
Yeah, well, as to the parking, that is very specific, not where they can park, but where they can't park, which is on any of the streets around there. And it even says that you can't stop there. And in terms of the number of events, that's defined not so much in the special permit, but well, it is, because the special permit conditions incorporate by reference their list of uses. And the uses did have the events at, I think it was 6 to 8 a year. The 6 to 8 a year, so that would be the limit. That doesn't mean there might be other, those are events, kind of undesignated events, but there will be other seminars, workshops, things like that. But the events are limited to 6 or 8 a year, and that's would be is already part of the special program.
Yes.
Wait, I should say the special permit as drafted, the conditions as drafted.
Hi, John Harsher, 65 North Broadway, one property south of 67. First of all, Mayor Smith, Board of Trustees, I appreciate the thought that you put into this over the last couple weeks, and with the comments that have recently been presented. So thank you for that consideration, and Brian, the talk that you gave, or whatever your commentary.
My rambling in the
No,
beginning.
I appreciate it. Thank you. One thing, and maybe I'm at fault here for not seeing it, but the law that I downloaded, I went through it and I couldn't see events. Is it in here, the word events?
I'm sorry.
The local law, you had just quoted the local law.
Oh, no, I was reading from the draft special conditions.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, in the law for adaptive reuse, the word events is not included. So
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I'll tell you, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It says it can be used as an historical, educational, and cultural facility, including but not limited to towards meeting rooms. So that was not an exhaustive list of the things it could be used for.
Okay.
And that was very specific, that not including, because at the time, when we drafted this law, which was fairly recently, we didn't know what other uses a facility like this or a house like this might be put to.
But events is not.
It's not on that
It's not
list.
in the, okay.
It
all right,
would be in the, including.
Sure, no, and listen, it's an ask, I mean, just like,
Yeah.
Earlier this evening, a
I'm
speed
glad I got
limit
you just
sign
that,
from
because I know it came up before.
25 to 15, it's an ask that I make. Just going back to the letter from the neighbors, there were, I counted, 37, 36, but, in the people that sign, there's, second generation Delinquent residents, homeowners for nearly 30 years, individuals who have, supported the village of Irving through, being on the Irvington Education Foundation, the Booster Club, PTSA, volunteer committees such as, farmers market, zoning, recreational department, volunteer coaches, so these are what I would consider, we say in Irvington, it takes a village. I mean, I think that these are representatives of the community that, are a part of this village, and it's important to them. And, what Guy was saying earlier about, 95%, we are, in agreement with the mission. It just comes with the uncertainty of the events and the amplification where, we get concerned. Reading through the June 16th letter from Jennifer Gray, just looking at a couple comments. And the AKF acoustical analysis report, like 2 months ago or so, when I spoke to them, they did say to me that most of the work that they do is on like construction of buildings, and if a road is getting in. And I went to the website today, and it looks like they're like a developer. They're a developer, and the area that has on acoustical studies, like it doesn't mention anything about like events or musical venues. And again, to reiterate that the analysis was done without actual amplification. So just keep that keep that in mind. There was a comment in the letter just about the aqueduct buffer restrictions, just being on construction only. And I do know that I just like to point out that a couple years ago there was a property on Hancock Place where the backyard was on the aqueduct, and they wanted to repurpose the garage into like a family room, presented before the zoning board. The variance was granted, but conditional upon kind of soundproofing being put into that wall for noise. So although I guess there's no the aqueduct buffer doesn't say anything about like sound, it was a consideration on a variance that was granted. Sound was a consideration. But no, I think a lot of things were addressed tonight, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
I just clarify one thing, just the AKRF comment about AKRF. AKRF is not a developer. They're a professional consulting firm. They do work throughout New York State. They represent property owners. They also represent municipalities. They do work for municipalities throughout the Hudson Valley. When I spoke to Christian Thompson, who was the lead for the project, he was, when we were engaging in a couple different firms to figure out who's going to do the acoustical analysis, he was listing for me a number of other projects that they've been involved in, including acoustical analyses for concert halls and other event spaces and things like that. So I just want to clear the record with respect to
And to be honest, like for me with the acoustical study, while it was, I'm glad they did it because it shows they're aware of the concerns. To me, that's not, to me, we have to trust them to do the right thing, because I know from, again, it's called the law, what's it called? Hudson Law.
Yes, what's more?
You cannot hear the words sometimes, but you can feel bass. And to me, there's like, I'm guessing my decibel reader didn't have anything, but my feet were shaking, that type of thing. So to me, if you did extensive studies, I don't think it would necessarily tell us what we need to know if they're going to be bad actors. And I don't think they're going to be bad actors. So I put less stock in that. And, I'm sure you spent a lot of money on it, so I'm sorry. But, I put less stock in that than I do knowing, having gotten to know them somewhat. Not probably as much as I'd like, but getting to know them, that they want this to work, so they're not going to, do something and then hide behind the study that, you can't hear it for our study when you're saying, I can't go to sleep at 8 o'clock or whatever, 9 o'clock at night, or whatever it is, or that your windows are shaking, that type of thing. So at the end of the day, we're going to trust that they're going to do the right thing if we're going to move forward with this. So I know we've talked a lot about that study. Anyone else from the audience wants to?
Couple quick points. I think just the bottom line for me is I wonder if it's reasonable to have some kind of business plan or some kind of here are the events that may happen in the next year or something like that. And and I think that would probably help to get everyone super comfortable and understand that it's not gonna follow to the T, but there's got to be some kind of outline of what it might look like. And so that was my first thought: is that completely unreasonable, or is that something that might be able to happen? And I was also wondering, and this might already be done, but I was just wondering, can we also get an idea of what's been done to the building so far? I don't know, we have this, what's been done or what the plan is, and maybe this has already been done, but what the plan is, what it would look like, what the cost might be in total, and why the fundraising might be necessary, but just kind of big picture stuff to, again, just get us comfortable, have a little bit more specific. So, I would echo everything that, Dan said in terms of having, the whole reason for all this is to set this up for a successful relationship, right? And to just have no ambiguity at the end of the year, everything went great, thumbs up, good, stamp is done, So I just think the the less ambiguity, the better, that's probably the theme you've heard from me the last couple of meetings. So thank you very much.
I don't have a plan for every event for the next year. The Institute and its purpose is going to be ever evolving. I don't know exactly what every particular seminar will be over the next year. Second part, as part of a special permit, I don't think we should have to share our cost of renovation of the property. I will say it will be substantive, and we've spent a lot of money thus far. So, I just don't know.
Yeah, maybe cost wasn't right. Maybe just more what the plan has been done, what the plan has been looked at.
And I think that's already been addressed as well in a previous hearing by Mr. Tilley. He's already outlined a few of the very big projects that are on the horizon over the next 12 to 18 months.
And is that kind of, do you envision in 12 to 18 months, the restoration work will be completed, or is that kind of like phase one? Or
I want to call it, and Steve, feel free, but I'm gonna call it phase one. So sort of the really big items, barring any emergencies, which we always seem to have,
Yeah.
is the carriage house roof, which is in progress. The next will be the pergola, and then after that, the terrace. Now, just those three things, especially the last two, the pergola and the terrace, those are 18-month projects at a minimum. So we're easily looking at the next 18 months just to get through those three items.
I guess we won't have any outside events.
Exactly.
Or a terrace, so we're having this conversation for now.
Right. And as far as things that have been done, there are quite a few, which Steve has also addressed previously.
And I guess this might be for Steve as well. So I know you said earlier it was discussed that you had met with the building inspector. To get the kind of the safety CFO type stuff, is that also 18 months away? Is that like, or is that like I have no idea like what a the safety concerns are, or what needs to be addressed or whatever.
Right.
I don't have any information, so
Right.
I just have some thoughts on that.
Well, without getting into the,
Sure.
the nitty-gritty of the building code, I'll just say that we met with Ed, we're working cooperatively with Ed. When you're working with an historic building and there's a change of use under the building code, then there's a narrative that one has to do. And so we're in the process of establishing the uses for each space, which then leads to a theoretical occupancy. And then that leads us to looking at egress, safety, and the fire safety, kind of
outdoor access.
security stuff that has to be built into the building. So that's going to be in the shorter run, where we'll get that plan going with Ed, and we'll have that development laid out. Then there's going to be the capital outlay that follows that, which is the safety stuff that needs to be put into the building. We are starting with obviously the carriage house, because I've been a little bit like the oncologist, when Rich and William, we went to the site, and then I'm sort of not giving great news about the condition of various elements of the building. It's over 100 years old, and some of the materials have kind of reached their statute of limitations, as it were. So a significant investment, and I think the better part of the average house price in the river towns has already been invested in this building, just in a kind of the iceberg that's not highly visible. But the next element beyond the carriage house will be the restoration of the pergola, which is on the aqueduct, is a highly visible improvement, and also represents an outdoor space that historically was used for those great photographs and for gathering and so on. So there's just a logical sequence that we have to follow, first with the building code analysis and approvals, and then the capital that goes into making those internal and external kind of repairs. And people have talked about, and we're, every day we look at the building with the exterior stucco. That's the thing that we come back, that's the icing on the cake. If we get around to that, we really need to do infrastructure and kind of the safety and security stuff, basic
So
stuff.
do you have the roughest of ballparks when like a C of O might be issued? Like things go well, or things go bad, like a best case scenario and a worst case scenario?
Well, I mean,
Don't say 0 to 100 years, but.
I think we have to walk that through with Ed in terms of occupancy, certificate of occupancy for a set of uses, and then as additional improvements are made, then that occupancy can move forward. But I think it's going to be at least a year and a half before we get to the point of kind of waking our way through those basic set of
I
improvements.
appreciate
Yeah,
estimate.
yeah, so it's, I mean, this kind of stuff takes time. It's really to do it right. And we're making up for the last 80 years of people that haven't had the capacity to really deal with all the issues with the building.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Same for it. The approval process for the National Trust, per my conversation, that will be a fairly quick turnaround. Their main concern is that any special use permit that we issue, go into, they want to make sure it doesn't do anything to change the structure or the architect of the building itself. So that's their chief concern. And we've been in touch with them. They understand we've gone through this process. We've been in touch with them since the purchase of the building. So that part is sort of just the final stage.
Okay, do we have an online comment, Larry?
Yeah.
Can't see the name. I think I know the picture as well.
Yes, hi, this is Jorge Magallon, residing at 286 Riverview Road. Can you hear me?
You can hear you, yep.
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to say two things. First, I wanted to encourage the board to vote affirmatively for the applicant. I think you all have more than enough information at this point, really, to vote affirmatively for them. And I think any more restrictions on their application at this point would kind of be unreasonable. And the second thing is, I really want to thank the applicant because for undertaking such an expensive renovation, it's really a boon for our town that the applicant take on this historic renovation. And I'm sure it's an incredibly expensive undertaking, and I really appreciate it on behalf of Irvington. And that's really it. Thank you.
Anyone else online, Larry? Anyone else in the flesh? Please.
No.
Yes, my name is Susan Robinson. I live at 9 Fargo Lane, which is directly across the street from Villa Luaro. And I would just like to reiterate what this gentleman, Pat, just said, word for word. I'm behind the permit process, and I'm grateful that they've made the investment to maintain Villa Luaro for the benefit of the village.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Anyone else? Please.
My name is Elise Martin. I'm from 361 Birch Lane. I have attended different events at Villa Luaro prior to the controversial incident, shall I say, where there was music and there were a number of people, and I don't believe there were any substantial complaints about that. However, I am curious as to whether or not there are other properties in the village who have been subject to this special permit application and what kind of process they went through.
There was only one other, which was the Octagon House. Yeah, they were the first ones to go through it. So there's only the second one. This is only for historic buildings, so there's probably another 3 or 4 that would qualify for it. So.
Okay, and were the concerns the same?
They didn't propose any events. All they wanted to do was give tours for very limited hours to very limited number of people. So their special permit, I think it was like a maximum of 10 people.
Yeah, but there were the same kind of restrictions on parking and, letting the village know about things and stuff like that. They had actually very, very similar set of special conditions. There's just a couple. There's additional ones on here because there's additional uses proposed for this property. But
sure. Anybody else? I mean, I do think we've heard, the concerns have, evolved slightly over the 2-year process, but I think they basically came down to the final letter that was, the number of events, the types of events, and noise. Those have been I think parking was the only other one that was probably, top 3 from the beginning. I think that the specificity of the parking in here doesn't allow it on Broadway, doesn't allow it on Fargo, that type of thing. I think I think that one's been addressed. I don't actually think we didn't hear kind of new concerns. So I think I'm personally ready to close the public hearing. We don't have a resolution or anything to vote tonight, but I'd be happy to close the public hearing and ask Marianne to draft a resolution for us, if you could.
Yeah, special permit, the resolution special permit,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd agree.
With the conditions as they
I
were.
agree.
Yes, as they've been amended over the.
Okay.
Okay, so I will make a vote to close the public hearing if I could have a second.
I'll second.
Second. Aye.
We'll count them.
Delayed.
We'll count them.
I'm always delayed. This is frustrating.
Okay, so, yeah, well, so when do you think you can have it for I guess it's a July meeting?
For the July meeting, yeah.
Okay.
What's the date of that?
17th, I believe, if that's a Monday,
That's a good question.
July 17th.
For the rest of us, when is that meeting?
All right, hold on.
I think I have it in my calendar. Maybe I don't.
17th.
Yeah, it would be the 17th, yeah. Okay.
I'll be in person for that one.
Thank you. You'll be there, you're gonna still be waiting for your flight.
No, don't say that.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Somehow I lost all my.
Where the boring parts.
We're not even halfway through this.
Depends on how well the firehouse stuff goes. Yeah, you just give it a second. Must have been something you said.
Yeah, we closed the hearing.
Next, I'd like to make a motion to open a public hearing and consider local law amending the village code to list Juneteenth as a holiday. If I can have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So I think this is a bit of housekeeping, Larry. We've already kind of determined it as a holiday, but it's not in our code. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, exactly. There's really only one mention, right? One spot in our code that even enumerates the federal holidays, and it happens to be the
noise ordinance.
The noise ordinance for construction hours specifically.
It's hilarious.
So, yeah, so this is the only modification that our code had to have for Juneteenth. Otherwise, as you know,
We already adopted it.
it's already been adopted. It
Now
was,
we know it's really a holiday because you can't make noise on it.
Yeah.
yeah, well,
What kind
you
of
can't
holiday is
do
that?
construction, actually, but,
You can make noise, but no construction.
yeah.
Is there any comments from the public?
No.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing if I can have a second.
Second.
Second. Aye.
We'll let you do the second on the resolution. How's that?
Yeah.
Resolve to adopt a local law amending the village code to list Juneteenth as a holiday. I'll make the motion if I can get a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well done.
That's funny.
Next is authorization to negotiate a lease for temporary relocation of senior citizen programs. Give me a little background on this, Larry.
Yeah, so the senior center is going to be undergoing HVAC work.
In
over
the summer.
In the middle of the summer, yeah, that's not ideal, but we got there. So it is going to require, and the request has been made to have at least some continuity of services at an alternate location. The location has been found. The lease agreement is still going back and forth because it was literally found a couple of days ago at St. Barnabas Church. And so really what I'm seeking is for the authorization to negotiate that lease. Obviously, I would do it with the final approval of the village attorney to make sure the language is correct. What we're talking about is probably about $10,000 or so of funds. Those funds have been requested as part of the capital budget for the additional funds required to complete the HVAC project. So it's kind of a cost of continuing services as part of that construction project.
Right, so that's already in your estimate for the capital.
Correct. Yeah, it's not, this is not coming out of the operating budget. That's it.
Okay, any questions on this one? Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to find another location in Irvington to.
Yeah, Brian, I know you worked hard on that as well.
Yes, yeah, there's a couple phone calls, but, St. Barnabas right away said they wanted to do whatever they could to help, so I'm glad it all worked out. Whereas the Irvington Senior Center will be undergoing HVAC and roof renovations during the summer of 2023, and whereas it is necessary to utilize temporary facilities to continue to run programming for the Senior Citizen Program during this time, now therefore be it resolved to authorize the village administrator to negotiate a lease with St. Barnabas Church for the temporary use of their facilities during the time of construction at the Irvington Senior Center, subject to the final review of the village attorney. I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Authorization for third-party plan review and inspection for residential and commercial buildings for the village of Irvington.
Okay, yeah, this is actually the second time this has been in front of you. Some of you weren't even on the board the last time it was in front of you. This relates to it's actually a grant that the village received from NYSERDA. I believe the amount of the grant is $50,000, so it's not small. It might be 75, but in any case, it's a pretty substantial grant. And the grant is conditioned on the village participating in basically a pilot program. NYSERDA is putting together a program where they are encouraging applicants to the village's boards to seek out the services of an expert on energy code review so that the plans can be reviewed by an energy code expert before they even walk through the door of the building department. The building department is authorized to accept, as long as they're done by a certified person that NYSERDA approves, the building department will accept that review and not do their own review. So it's not a duplication here. And the issue that was related to this topic the last time we talked is there was some confusion about whether this was mandatory, which would be requiring the applicants to now hire additional professional to do this, or whether it was voluntary. And this resolution makes it completely clear that it's completely voluntary. If an applicant has a renovation, especially that involves energy code aspects, they will be given the information about the third-party reviewers, and it's up to them whether they want to hire someone or not. That's the experiment that NYSERDA wants to do. They want to see that if people do take advantage of it, they want to see if the applications come through the door in better shape and addressing the energy code issues more succinctly than if they don't hire experts. But
So the grant doesn't cover the cost to the homeowner.
No, it was never intended to. And that's not how it's being implemented in Hastings, which got the same exact grant at the same exact time. So it was a little confusion about that, but it's in every sense of the word an experiment or a pilot program. So that's it. I mean, I think the resolution explains it. I know it's rather wordy,
And the
but
fact that it's all voluntary, I mean, it's not like we're imposing anything on anyone here.
Yeah.
So it's-
yeah, and it may be that it speeds things through, and applicants may actually find it beneficial to do it, but that's part of the experiment.
How does an applicant find out that this is an option or this is available?
We're going to make material available to them that NYSERDA has, as part of this, set up a website where you can search for these types of vendors that they have pre-qualified and pre-approved. So experts that they've pre-approved. So we will notify potential applicants, anyone who's, reaches out to the village building department, with a prospective project, we'll notify them about that. And again, it's up to them.
All right. Whereas New York State has adopted the 2018 International Building Code family of codes with amendments named 2020 Codes of New York State as a guiding principle pertaining to residential and commercial construction and development within the state. Whereas the Village of Irvington realizes that to promote public safety and preserve the quality and value of property within the community, Coordinated development review processes are essential to ensuring that the adopted nationally recognized building codes and best practices are incorporated into buildings and structures. And whereas third-party plan review and inspection services will only be for ECCC, NYS, or New York Stretch compliance review, review by other departments in Irvington will still be required. And whereas the Village Board of Trustees deems it to be the best interest of the citizens of Irvington to authorize the building inspector to allow third-party plan review for residential and commercial buildings in the village. And whereas the use of third-party plan review is not mandatory, and whereas if the permit applicant decides to use a third-party plan review, the time of performance and terms of service are negotiated solely between the permit applicant and third-party plan review and inspection service provider. And whereas it shall be the permit applicant's responsibility to ensure that third-party plan review and inspection services provider receives all the necessary construction documents and lists of municipal requirements. Approved stamped documents shall be submitted to the building department prior to the issuance of building permit. Now therefore be it resolved to authorize the building inspector to allow third-party plan review and inspection for compliance with the Energy Conservation Construction Code of New York State. I will make the motion. If I can get a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well done. Approval of grant application for the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation.
Okay, so the background on this is, and I'll say this is the third time's a charm. We've applied two times already for this particular project. We've been told numerous times over the past several years that there's plenty of money available for water infrastructure projects. We think we have a good one, which is the River Road water main going from basically West Main Street. This is on the other side of the railroad tracks, West Main Street down to Scenic Hudson Park. That's a line that's been very problematic. It needs to have special coatings because it's under the in the water table, adjacent to the Hudson River.
It's also under high pressures at the top of the hill, right?
Yeah, it's had lots of problems over the years. I think the veterans of the board will remember many outages down there, especially around the holidays.
Thanksgiving Day
And others. So we've applied now twice. We got rejected twice. We are not making this project contingent on grant funding. The reason we haven't done this project is because of the availability of water pipe. And if you've attended our project meetings, you remember hearing us talk about it. So this is not setting us back and we're not waiting, but the grant funding has been opened up and we're going to try it one more time. We're obviously trying to improve the application, but it's a pretty competitive program. So that's it. We're taking another shot. But the project will get done at some point once the pipe becomes available, and we're working on that pretty actively.
Whereas the Village of Irvington is applying to the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation for Water Infrastructure Improvement Act grant for the River Road Water Main Replacement Project. And whereas the grant application requires the applicant's municipality's Board of Trustees to authorize the undertaking of the project, expenditures for the project, and the obligation of the funds necessary for the local match. And whereas the total project cost is projected at $589,300, and the village will provide a match equal to 40% of this project cost. Whereas the project is type 2 action, number 1, pursuant to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, thus requiring no further environmental review. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby does approve and endorse the application for $353,500 grant under the 2023 Water Infrastructure Improvement Act Drinking Water Program for the River Road Water Main Replacement Project, which has a total project cost $589,300, is authorized the undertaking of the project, and upon approval of the grant request, commits $235,800 in local matching funds to the project from existing surplus funds, and further resolve that the village administrator is hereby authorized to sign the funding agreement with the Environmental Facilities Corporation and any associated documents. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is appointment of volunteer firefighters. Resolved to approve the following new probationary members of the Irvington Fire Company, subject to the final approval by the Irvington Fire Company. Anthony Magras and Eric Labors. I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next is a establishment of the joint Route 9 Joint Committee and the Route 9 Advisory Committee. We discussed this somewhat, Larry, but if anyone want to give a quick, I don't know if we want to give a quick overview. Basically, what's happening now is
Yeah, happy to. So this is the Route 9 preliminary engineering study that's being undertaken by New York State DOT relates to Route 9 from Sleepy Hollow down to Hastings, so the 5 communities along the way. The mayors have discussed this extensively, and they believe that it's in our best interest to form what we're calling the joint committee, which will be a joint committee of the other villages, and to appoint a single member to that joint committee. And we are pretty confident that the other communities are appointing their paid village administrators or managers to be that person. The purpose of the joint committee is to be the interface with the New York State DOT regarding that project. So it would be, if you so choose, it would be my responsibility to carry out the wishes of our board as it relates to the preliminary engineering of Route 9 in the village of Irvington. But I would be working together with the other 4 villages. So that's the first part of this. The second part of this is that back in 2016, when the study was first being conceived of, where the entire corridor was studied with grant funding from New York State, there was a steering committee that was formed, and it was made up of loosely 3 volunteers, or in some cases elected officials from each of the villages along the way. That steering committee followed the planning study throughout the process. And since that time, the study's been completed, and now DOT is actually funding a preliminary engineering of that to try to implement what's in that study. And so that steering committee, the mayors again have discussed this. The steering committee is not any longer needed for that purpose, and they're looking to form what they're calling an advisory committee, Route 9 Advisory Committee, which would be made up of a different combination of people, maybe the paid village manager, administrator, maybe an elected official, and maybe a volunteer from the community. I'm leaving that open at this point because I think the board probably needs to discuss who those people should be on that committee. But the resolution at least contemplates forming that committee and moving forward in that direction, so that we can then start getting together with the other communities who will have a similar 3 people assigned to it. Did I cover everything?
Yeah.
You good? The resolution probably says all of what I just said, but it's a little bit long
But
for
it's
you.
much drier the way they do it.
Yeah, sorry.
Whereas the Route 9 Intermunicipal Steering Committee was created by resolutions adopted by the boards of trustees of Sleepy Hollow, Tarrytown, Irvington, Dobbs Ferry, and Hastings on Hudson to follow up on the complete streets policies in the various municipalities in 2016. And whereas the municipalities, with the assistance of Sustainable Westchester, which I didn't know about that, so right now, secured $150,000 in funding from the new New York Bridge Public Benefit Fund, administered by the New York State Thruway Authority, for conceptual plan and feasibility study of the shared Route 9 corridor with a focus on improved pedestrian, cyclist, and motorist safety and quality of life, and improved accessibility of the B-Line bus system. And whereas the objectives included connectivity, economic development, and the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and whereas a transportation planning firm of Nelson Nygaard was retained to draft a conceptual plan known as the Route 9 Active Transportation Conceptual Design, which was completed in 2019, and whereas in 2022, through the efforts of State Senator Andrew Stewart Cousins, funding was designated to New York State DOT to engage the engineering firm of WSP to move into preliminary and detailed engineering design of Route 9 corridor starting in spring of 2023. And whereas the previously formed steering committee has completed the task for which it was charged, and whereas it is necessary for each village to select a designee, interface with New York State Department of Transportation and the project, will execute decisions regarding the project as per instructions of their respective boards of trustees. And whereas it is also desirable to collaborate with fellow designees from the involved villages as New York State DOT and its consultant WSP prepare the preliminary and detailed engineering design, and so a joint committee is proposed to perform this function. Whereas it is also desirable to maintain corridor-wide project perspective, provide institutional memory, expertise, and advice, and provide input on public engagement, planning, and events. And so an advisory committee is proposed to perform these functions. Now therefore be it resolved to dissolve the previously appointed steering committee, and further resolved to participate in the Route 9 Joint Committee to interface with New York DOT as consultant and appoint Lawrence Schaffler, Village Administrator, Village of Irvington designee, Further resolved to participate in the Route 9 Advisory Committee with appointments up to the committee to be determined later. I will make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Discussion of Irvington Fire Municipal Facility Project. That could be a whole meeting into itself. But
Yeah, it could be, but we'll try to keep it succinct. If you, of course, if you have any questions along the way, just ask, but we'll try to do our best to simplify a complicated topic. So to pick up where we left off from the last meeting, we were asked to better design the theater elements that will continue to exist in this building once the municipal offices are relocated. So in the past week plus, Ed has been working with the architects to come up with a plan. The architects came up with a sketch. I'm not going to show you all the pretty pictures, and there's a reason for that. But they have developed a sketch plan of how the second floor would be divided up. The elements that would be included in that second floor would be a box office, a concession area, bathrooms, theater offices, I think about 2 of them, and a reopening of the grand staircases at the upper lobby area in the lobby. And that would allow, essentially, the main entrance to the theater would be from Main Street. There still would be handicap access through the elevator, and there would be elevator access between the 3rd floor and the 2nd floor. So in between, during performances and whatnot. But there would be a direct connection between the theater level and the 2nd floor, the lobby space. The reason I'm not showing a sketch is because, and this has been communicated with the theater manager, and he's already spoken to the theater commission. We made it very clear that the sketch that was put together was really what we called a proof of concept. We did it to make sure that A, all of those elements could fit, and B, to try to arrive at a cost estimate that we could add into the rest of this project. And the answer is yes, it all fits. It would leave space on the 2nd floor for recreation programs of similar size that we've already told the recreation department. And the budget would add, the total cost for those elements would be 1.3 million. Again, most of that is in the staircase. The staircase was wood, it now needs to be metal, as you can imagine. You can't feed an assembly space with wood stairs. But that's the architectural elements that would be involved. So with the addition of it's not an addition of 1.3, but now with this cost of 1.3 million associated with the theater elements, brings the entire budget for the full project up to $18,111,000. That's the estimate we're working with, and then basing the rest of this financial analysis on. Any questions about any of that, or no? Okay. So yeah, that's it. Katie, the next step to really talk about is now with that number, which we're conveniently rounding off to 18.2 million. We're going to talk a little bit about how that could be financed and what the impacts of that would be. So, Katie.
Yeah, so for fund balance, we're projecting the unassigned fund balance at the end of this year to be approximately 6.8 million, which is 33% of our total budget. So the state, that's a very healthy fund balance. The state usually recommends having it between 10 and 15%. So in the numbers that we're gonna show you two different scenarios, but both of those scenarios we're recommending using 3.5 million of fund balance. So in the first scenario, we're going to borrow the full 18.2 million amount and then use fund balance gradually to lower the debt service payments for the first 8 years. So the amount of fund balance would be reduced gradually, and the effect of that would be to smooth out the impact on the tax rate in the initial years, and then lengthen out the number of years where there would be pressure on the tax rate. And then the second scenario would be just to lower the 18.2 million borrowing amount by 3.5 million, so it would be 14.7 borrowed. So then the pros and cons of that is for the gradual use of the fund balance, that would result in higher levels of debt because you're borrowing the whole thing, which results in a higher interest expense, but it's also a more gradual increase for the taxpayers. And then in scenario number 2, it's an upfront reduction in debt, so that would be less interest costs. But then there's more steeper budget impacts in the initial years, and then it flattens out after that. So to put it into perspective on what the impact on taxpayers would be, so under scenario 1, where we're borrowing the whole amount, the total interest and principal would be 30.7 million over the life of the project.
Which is 25 years, right?
Yes, 25 years. And then under scenario number 2, the total would be 24.7 million. So in total, scenario number 2 is 6 million less than scenario 1 in the long run. So we based our numbers off an average taxpayer with a home valued at 1.2 million. So under the first scenario, which is the gradual use of fund balance, the average annual cost, the increase for taxpayer is $608 per year. And under scenario 2, the average annual increase for taxpayers is $554 per year.
That's over the 25 years.
Over 25 years, yeah.
So in total, if we did use the 3.5 million in fund balance, that would leave us with approximately 3.3 million of fund balance left, which would be about 16% of the current year's budget.
Right. And the 16% still puts you above the village's target range. Our target range is 10 to 15%, has always historically been that. So 16 still leaves you above that range, although obviously not quite as healthy, but anyway, just to put it in perspective. So the next part is an attempt to try to explain how this new debt would get laid on top of the current debt that the village has and the future debt that we're planning on as part of our normal regular capital budget, which is also on the agenda tonight. We're kind of talking about this all at once. What we did is we took the future projections of our debt service and our levels of debt from our capital budget. Our capital budget includes what we have as existing debt and then also what we see as future projects that would generate future debt. And we took those level of debt, that level of debt, and we laid on top of it each year what the new debt from the firehouse, that the firehouse would generate. And way it lays out, and it depends on the scenario, which is why we're showing you two different numbers each time we talk about this. If you go with scenario one, which is gradual use of fund balance, borrowing the full amount, but then offsetting fund balance, offsetting debt service each year, that scenario would result in a peak amount of debt at about $35.6 million of debt. The current amount of debt that the village has now is just around 14 million. And without the firehouse, it's projected to peak at about 17 million. So what we're laying on is just about double. The second scenario is a little less than that, as Katie said in the beginning. The second scenario would reduce our initial borrowing by 3.5 million. And so the total debt for the village with all this firehouse debt would come out to about 32.2 million. That's just that's a picture of the, we're going to show you these numbers later on a schedule on the screen, but that's a picture of what the total outstanding debt would be for the village. The next part of it is what would the total debt service, the annual principal and interest payments look like? How would that peak out? And before I move on to that, I will say that the peak time, the point when we arrive at the peak amount of debt would be in fiscal year 27-28, based upon the schedule that we have currently. So now looking at debt service, we've laid on top the debt service that would be generated by the firehouse. We've laid that on top of the village's existing debt service, existing capital projects. Right now, existing capital projects, our debt service is about 1.5 million annually. It's projected, without the firehouse, it's projected to rise to a peak of about 2.5 million. So that's, again, without the firehouse. When we lay on the firehouse debt service, our debt service would peak in both scenarios, would peak at 3.6 million annually.
And that's what percentage of our total budget?
Right. So do we have a percentage of budget? Yeah, we do.
It would be.
That's on the comparison, yeah.
3.6 divided by 20.6 million. Can we flip the calculator?
Yeah,
That's about
don't we have that on here?
16%.
Isn't it one of these numbers right here? Yeah, it's that. Yeah, 16%. There you go. Thank you. We had it on schedule, sorry.
I'm good at math.
Right. And we're gonna show you a comparison, to what other communities look like, obviously, just to put it all in perspective for you. The difference between the two scenarios, again, both of them peak out at about 3.6 million of debt service. The difference is, and it's a subtle difference, is that under scenario one, where we're using gradual amounts of fund balance, the peak debt service would happen at a different time than, peak debt service would happen later down the line, would happen in 2032. So because of the way fund balance is being used and then it's being tailed off, you would actually, the taxpayer would continue to see, the tax rate would continue to see pressure from this project all the way out through 2032. It would be less severe pressure, but it would last longer. And then after 2032, the debt service from this project would start tailing off. And then, of course, other projects would tail off. And you're no longer using fund balance at that point. In scenario two, again, we peak out at 3.6 million, but that would happen in 2029. And after 2029, the debt service from this project would start to tail off. And the impact on the taxpayers would, the impact on the tax rate would be more gradual. So again, it's kind of more pain early on, and then it eases up versus lesser pain over a longer period of time. That's essentially the two scenarios that we're talking about here. Do you want to go into the facts, or do you want? Yeah. No, you did that. Sorry, no, hold on. Okay, so now, yeah, let me just make this so it fits on the screen nicely. So Katie put together and updated something that I had done a year ago, but updated a comparison schedule for you that I think will help. Let me just get to the point where I'm sharing it. Make sure you can see it also on the screen. Okay, is that, you want me to zoom in a little bit more, or you probably don't need the explanations just yet. Yeah, I can always scroll over. All right, let me try to.
One of the advantages of being on Zoom is I can make it bigger myself.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right. So, so these are the numbers that I just spoke about. If you look, the left side of the screen, so columns B, C, and D, let's say, are the measure of total debt. And the way we compare total debt in New York State is we compare it to how much the state constitution would allow us as a village to borrow, the maximum amount that we would be allowed to borrow under the state constitution. So in the case of Irvington, our current debt is about, as I said, 14 million, 13.7 million. Constitutional debt limit, we could borrow up to 130 million if we wanted to. But right now we're at 10.5% of our debt limit. Scenario one, 35.5 million is where we would peak out on debt, which would push us to 27.3. And then scenario two is that lesser amount where we're not borrowing the full amount, would push us to 24.7. You can see the other communities here. I don't have to go through them one by one, but there's obviously others that are, a couple that are higher, a few that are lower. This would definitely, as you can see, put us above average and towards the top of our neighboring communities.
So the ones that are higher because they've done similar projects recently.
Yeah, I mean, Ardsley and Tarrytown are the two notable ones. Tarrytown, I think Brian mentioned it at the last meeting. There was, they've done significant amounts of work in terms of municipal facilities and other projects. Ardsley has one very big project that they're in the process of completing. It's their new DPW facility, which I believe has doubled their expectations in terms of costs. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's gone from on the order of 10 million to the order of 20 million. So that's why their debt is elevated. So the second side of this page is then measuring, like the question you just asked, that measuring the debt service as a percentage of the total budget. And you can see here that would put us really at the top of the percentages compared to the other communities.
Can I ask a question? I guess I'm remembering what Brian said too, that Tarrytown did a whole bunch of stuff. So we would be like we would be above them with one building, right?
Right. I mean, I'm not trying to spin it one way or another, but it's a little, we're meeting, probably 4 different facility needs with this one, with this one project. I mean, that's the way I'm looking at it. This is not a $18 million firehouse. You know what I mean? It's dealing with firehouse. It's dealing with justice court issues. It's dealing with obviously municipal facilities issues. It's dealing with theater, and even to some extent dealing with recreation and the condition of that building, and to a lesser extent, the shooting range, which is kind of a lingering issue that we have.
And the police offices, right?
Well, and the police offices would be able to expand, which is, you know, that part, similar to the theater, hasn't been designed, but it's been kind of proof of concept, and the police will be able to have an appropriately sized women's locker room available, which they don't have now. And they'll be able to move their evidence, which is now up on the second floor, completely separate from the rest of the police department, down into within the confines of the police department. They have an evidence locker.
Can I ask a question that I feel like I think about and then I never ask? I always forget to ask it. Our police have a shooting range. Is that normal for a police department to have their own? Like, what are the other municipalities?
There's only like 3 in the county.
Okay, so they all go to whatever.
Including the county facility.
Including,
Yeah.
that's including the county. There's only, Yonkers has one, Bry has one, and the county has one. That's it. And that's why it's so hard. That's why you take on a bunch of overtime, because the county says, yeah, you can do it, but it's from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. So you send your 6 guys, but you have to go and qualify at least annually. So
Do we rent hours out?
they don't charge you to do it, but we pay overtime because the guys have to come in when they're not usually scheduled or whatever, because we don't have enough range time.
But to outside entities,
Yeah, meaning do we rent like?
there have been
to-
times
to
where,
other- yeah.
there have been times where other departments have come and used it, but it's on a, what I would call an emergency basis, or, you know, it's a one-off basis. It's not a regular occurrence. We don't have,
We get, I would say we actually get fairly large number of requests to use our outdoor range, but we say no because the neighbors complain when it's used too much. So I've had, I can say 3 or 4 different municipalities call me personally and say, hey, can you talk to your chief and get your range? Because just one of the big things was Camp Smith. Actually, before 9/11, that was the place where almost everybody went, because they had, let's say, 100 different areas you could use and you could do everything up there. But then it became federalized and they wouldn't let any local police departments use it anymore. So that was a big loss. That was kind of how it worked in the past. And then when I was doing the sheriff thing, we would go and borrow, even we're part of the county, but we'd still have to use Yonkers because the county was full all the time. So it's just such a lack of, and you go back 50 years ago, every department had one. Like they would be like in this room, and what they found was the lead was so bad that it was like a hazard basically.
Yeah, it's like counterintuitive, like that our small police department, to me, like in my own head, has its own firing range.
Yeah, I would say that every department did, and it used to be indoors.
Yeah.
Until they realized how bad it was.
Well,
I think a lot of places don't have an outdoor spot. They could probably
So are we concerned then that is contemplated to have that indoors, right? Like that.
Well, now what they used to just have it was literally like a room with maybe a window they open. Now it's like you have to have these crazy ventilation systems. That's why it's so expensive. So like the county range is all indoors. The Yonkers ranges are indoors. Rise indoors. I'm guessing ours would be very similar to Rise, which I've only used once, but very nice. I think it was only 2 lanes. I was like, that's what ours is going to be.
ours is 3.
Or 3. Okay. And I think the county is 10 or 8.
I'm not sure.
That's where the police academy is. So
Yeah, we have to engage, you know, if the project goes forward, we need to engage an expert to design it. I mean, not that it's super expensive, but just we need, you know, we're not incurring that cost now. We have the space set aside and the basic parameters. We also need an expert to look at the security features of the Justice Court, for example. Again, we have the base of it designed, but we're not going to commit more until we know this project's going forward. Same goes for the theater, you know, that last little piece. So one other quick word about the comparison that's up on the screen. So one of the pieces of information that Katie added in here is the bond ratings for each of the other communities. You can see that well, just so for your information, all the other communities are AA, just like us. We're AA1, which is higher than AA2. We were just upgraded from AA2 to AA1. We were you know, there's a lot of reasons probably that went into that, but one of them is the fact that our reserves are so healthy. So with a significant reduction of our reserves, and with the significant increase in debt, you can expect to see a downgrade, is my guess. I wouldn't, based upon this, I wouldn't expect to see it downgraded below AA2, but again, that's not up to me. I'm just looking at the data for what we gathered from the other communities.
Elmsford hasn't completed their audits in several years.
I don't know, yeah, it's not really sure what's going on there,
Yeah,
but.
that was the
Why,
issue. They haven't-
why
They
is
haven't-
Ardsley, sorry.
Okay.
Why is Ardsley still A1?
Yeah, they have the biggest debt of all other than Tarrytown and
Yeah.
they're one. Why are they one?
Yeah, so we're not really sure, other than the fact that it's very likely that the debt that they have on their books is fairly new and the rating they haven't been re-rated. That's my guess. But I don't know that for sure. We can dig into it, but I think, you know, I think there's a chance that they'll be downgraded. But again, I'm not predicting it.
And
but-
then, I guess, what do we think is the lifespan of our DPW current situation? Like, what do we think, you know, when do we think that situation would really, something would need to be done there?
Well, look, I mean, that situation is not as urgent as the substandard fire department and some of the other municipal, you know, items we were trying to address, like the theater entrance and all that. The DPW could continue to exist the way it probably looked that way for, you know, 50 years at this point. It could continue for an extended period of time, but I think what is driving the desire to move that facility is the idea that it's a prime piece of property in a prime location that could have a very good use that's not what it is now. And so and we also think that if the correct property is found, that you could move it for not a lot of net cost to the village. In other words, if you can find a facility that has, you know, the kind of the foundations of a facility that you need, and it's the right size and the right location, you could move into it with not a lot of improvements, and you could unload and sell a very valuable piece of property. You might even be a net positive, you know what I mean? So I don't see that project, you know, as
It's not a
one.
dire problem.
Yeah, and I don't see it as a project that triggers you know, a $10 million project like it did in Ardsley, which is now more than that.
20 million.
Yeah. You know, so I just don't see that. And if it ever turned into a $10 million project, you'd probably never choose to do it because it's not that as urgent. You know what I mean? From a net standpoint, if it ever costs that much. But if it's done right and the right scenario comes along, you know, you could significantly improve that area of the village. You could provide, we've talked about, you know, transit-oriented development, housing, you know, adjacent to the train station.
Can I ask another question? So have we looked at, because we talked about the firehouse and the conditions in the firehouse being unsafe. If this referendum doesn't go through, do we have a plan B?
We've had a lot of plans that we've looked at over the years. And as you know, it's been studied. I have documents in my files that go back to 1990 that we're studying what to do with this firehouse. You know, the limiting factor, the real limiting factor is the size of the bays and the fact that you can't expand the size of the bays without redoing the entire structure of the building and spilling out onto the next property. So one scenario is to address only that and not the municipal side of this, you know, which is theater side, which is justice court, which is all the other. So that's one option. Another option, to be perfectly honest with you, is looking at a joint scenario with another community. I think that Dobbs Ferry is actively looking for a location. You know, if there was a the limiting factor on that is finding the right location that's, you know, in the right spot to service both communities out of a joint facility. And that just doesn't exist at this point. But, you know, we might be forced into, you know, really looking more carefully at that and trying to seek out property, maybe even condemning it, you know, which is not a pleasant thing to do. So we'll call them Plan B, but they're not very good. And if they were good, we would have been working on them a long time ago.
Larry, have we gotten a lot of feedback from, like, I know we're just talking about how it's not just the firehouse, it's these other projects for other departments. Have we gotten feedback on like how well they work for those departments? Like, I'm just a little concerned with like the plans we saw for the rec department. I mean, they're gonna have some offices in the basement, no windows, some space over here. Like, I guess, have we gotten feedback from Joe, like, this is great, like, I'm excited about this, it's way better than we are now, or it's not ideal, but, you know, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, is this really a great win for everybody, or is it like, we are really building a firehouse and we're trying to squeeze in as much as we can, but it's maybe not like ideal?
Right. I mean, they would be on the lower level. They're not totally buried within the ground because of the way the land runs. There is actually access from the street level on the western side of the building. So it's not totally without, you know, it's not totally. Now, is it light and airy like the third floor? You know, probably not, but so there's good parts and bad parts, but the rec department, you know, they are aware that their building needs a lot of work. And so, you know, I've referred to their building as an albatross. We have pretty significant issues in that building, and to say that the space there is ideal is that's not a fair statement, you know.
They don't have windows now either.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a basement already, although again, the west side has windows, so it's not too different. But they're gonna have better space, and they're gonna have more flexible space in this building in terms of programming. I mean, they'll be able to run, if they wanted to, smaller scale programs, but they could run them multiple at a time because there's segregated spaces upstairs in this building. They don't have that ability in the rec center. The one thing that they wouldn't have, and I think we talked about this at a previous meeting, and they certainly know about it, is they wouldn't have that large contiguous space that they have upstairs right now, the former sanctuary for the church in the building that they're in. They wouldn't have that large space in this building. So they would have to adapt and use the senior center for that scale of a program.
Dance programs in there. So they would run all those dance programs in the senior center?
Yeah, or they may be small enough that they can be run in, the one large space that they would have is actually upstairs in what the current clerk's office is, which might seem small to you, but the rooms actually adjoin and it could be one basically large room. So it's not a small room, but it's not quite the same as the big sanctuary that they have. So I think some could still be run upstairs, but others they would have to run at the senior center. But look, I mean, it's a hard thing to say that you want to keep hold of that building because that building is going to need a lot of work. And it may not be, you know, some of it will be real soon, and some of it may be a little bit further off, but there's a lot of work that's needed. So, you know, we're trying to sidestep that if we can.
The only thought I had is, this always makes scenarios harder, but is there also a hybrid of scenario one and number two? And I probably need to get my Excel solver out to figure out exactly what it is, but where you would say, rather than saying, you know, we apply the 3.5 million upfront or phase it in, and you know, pay down, say 2.2 million and then phase it in, so you're offsetting some of that over the first 10 years or whatever. I think that's probably the last scenario, and I'm sure there is a number that kind of
There's-
tweaks it perfectly.
Right.
But I think this is good for discussion purposes, obviously, but we can, look at that a little further.
We had that conversation this afternoon, as a matter of fact, with our bond advisor. You know, we gave you kind of both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And there's no question that anything in
There's a
between is
million in
possible.
between, yeah.
You
Someone
know,
else freezing.
I am so cold.
I don't even know what to do with myself.
I mean,
I'm like,
It's keeping me awake.
I think so.
Me too.
It's not 70.
No, I'm telling you, it's set to 70, but it's reading 60, 69 in this one.
I'm like, the next thing you're gonna look over here and I'm just gonna be like this.
It
must be blowing out that way, because I'm okay.
No,
here.
yeah, no, when I sit there for planning board, it doesn't bother me. Over here,
Yeah.
it's horrible, like I'm freezing.
Might take a second. There we go. So quiet now.
Thank you, Arlene.
Sorry.
Is anyone else really warm now?
Yeah, but it feels good.
Yeah, I'm good with that too. I'm good with that.
So yeah, we did talk about these scenarios with the financial advisor. Anything in between can happen. You know, we obviously, you can't do unlimited scenarios in something like
No,
this, but
of
at
course
least
not.
gives you an idea of the range. Yeah, so A1, that was it.
And then the other thing we just wanted to add, so based on the numbers that are presented here, the state also does like a fiscal stress ranking to show if like the municipalities are in fiscal stress. So even the highest one on there, which I guess would be Tarrytown, aren't even anywhere near an indicator that would show that there's fiscal stress.
You need to accumulate 45 points in the various indicators that they use, and Tarrytown has 5 points. We have 0 right now, but Tarrytown has 5. So that doesn't trigger anything. And the other point that we need to make is that the numbers here truly are what I would call worst case scenario, in the sense that, assuming our costs are accurately estimated, obviously that's always the assumption. But this does not assume any outside funding. And, we're pretty confident that this project will be able to qualify for some outside funding. Not a lot. I mean, municipal facilities are not going to get funded by anyone. But justice courts, fire department, firehouses, theaters,
Historic theaters too.
historic ones, HVAC type work, energy efficiency projects, which all of this will be, efficient heat pump work. All of that is ripe for funding. So, and again, and then there's always the overriding kind of federal earmark process from the local legislators. So, we're confident that we can get some level of outside funding. So then these numbers would obviously go down from here. This is what we're hoping is worst case scenario.
And one other point of clarification, the $608 for scenario 1 and the $554 for scenario 2. The 608 isn't smoothing anything. That's just the gross cost. But you weren't going to, that doesn't, like, you didn't say that, hey, we'll take, of the 3.5 million that we're going to, that wasn't a smooth number, correct? That was the
That's
gross
the
number.
average over all 25 years. So for example, in that scenario, in 2015, the average increase in cost would only be $59. But then when you jump all the way to 2034, it's $722. So an average over the 25
Yeah.
years, it's 608, but it
But
fluctuates.
is that including putting in a certain amount of, using the fund balance?
Yes.
So that is in there. So that's already accounted.
Yes.
That's already calculated.
Yep. Yeah, if we weren't using any fund balance at all, and you were just borrowing the full amount and paying it off, the average would be 690 over the 25 years. And again, that's for the average taxpayer of $1.2 million home. So 690 is without any use of fund balance. 608 is using it in a gradual way. And 554 is using it all up front to offset the full borrowing.
Can you maybe share this with us?
We can send you all of what we were talking
Yeah,
from.
so I think
Yeah.
this is something we need to all digest. and
Yeah,
think about.
we no
When we're-
question.
When we're warm.
We hesitated.
In the sunshine.
We hesitated handing out complicated schedules without talking to you
Yeah,
about it
absolutely.
first and explaining it. So by all means, you'll have whatever you need in your inbox and you can review it and ask questions and,
We have to make a decision by the July meeting, so.
yeah, I mean, without scheduling special meetings, yeah, we could come back here on, let's say, the work session of July 12th. And we can pull out the schedules, answer any questions you have. If you still have questions at that point, we can, but that would really be the point where you need to say, hey, draft a bond resolution in time for July 17th, because that's really the date you need to hit.
John Siegel just had a question or a comment. New building designed to solve a lot of building problems in a number of departments. It'd be helpful to know the cost of the solution if you don't have the new building. In other words, if the cost of the new building less the cost of fixing the Rex department, fixing the firehouse, if that'd be done. It'd be interesting to see that, if that's possible.
Sure.
Again, they obviously need to come up with some estimates and all those things, but.
So that assumes that you have a revised theater entrance on your wish list, right?
Yeah, you could do it with or without that, I'm guessing, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, the numbers will be compelling if you're addressing your firehouse and you're addressing your theater,
Yeah, the $7 million entrance.
or whatever it is, 6.5, whatever it probably would be. And then you add in those other costs, it'll be compelling in terms of the way these
I think
costs
if we
break
could
out.
maybe do the back of the envelope on that. I mean, I don't know if we have
Yeah, no, we can get that, it's not a
an
problem.
estimate for the
Yeah.
rec center.
Would some things not be addressable? Like we wouldn't have increased space for the police unless we get another building, or like the fire range wouldn't change, I guess, so like those wouldn't be addressed.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that'd almost be an interesting thing to say, things that even with our
pros and cons,
costs,
yeah.
like here are things we still couldn't address at all.
Right. We can do that. Yeah, no, I mean.
So I think that'll be compelling when we're talking to the public about this, but they kind of have the all-in
Right.
information. That's a good point. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I mean,
We know
that's.
someone's listening other than Mitch.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we're,
Waiting for his plane.
He likes to get there 9 hours early.
he's got a 5.
It's a layover. It's a layover. Yeah. Speaking of which, I have to start heading to the gate in about 5 minutes. Is there anything that I needed to vote on?
Capital budget?
Well, yeah, we hope to finalize the capital budget. So if you
John, do
want
you
to.
have comments on that? You can go first.
Well, so if you want, I can tee up the conversation. So, on the capital budget, where we left it is, you've had it twice in front of you. We've gone through some of the projects, the more significant ones, and you had an opportunity to look at more closely the recreation projects. I can pull that up if it would be helpful. Mitch, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this in the time before you get to your.
Did you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, I feel terrible. I mean, but I so don't, just do the best you can do and I'll go when I have to go.
Okay, so let me bring up the.
Crazy thing, he's only flying to Pittsburgh, but he left out of Westchester. So we had to go to
If
Boston
you want,
first.
I'm in Seattle and I'm catching a flight to Portland.
Okay.
Zoom's amazing. Okay, so. Oh,
As he
boy.
says, I only get these cramps when I'm at the meeting and I don't drink enough and.
All right, so
No, it could be the chairs.
that could be too, yeah. Although they're a little bit taller.
It's
but-
also really cold in here, so hearing this.
Turn the heat off.
Yeah.
Something the air conditioner.
So,
Remind me.
I have up on, let me get a little zoomed in
Did
here.
anything change from the last time?
No, so what, we made some changes before the last time we talked. And we did review the recreation project. So I think, I mean, unless you have other questions, I'm happy to scroll through each of the projects, but unless you had really specific questions or issues with any of the recreation projects, I need to get an idea of where you want to go with that. You know what I mean? I don't think there were other questions in other departments, but I could be wrong. So the, you know, the recreation project, the two projects you really talked about, there's three projects. The Memorial Park dugout, which I know you heard from, you know, a good number of people on that. But the two projects that are really up for conversation are the basketball court reconstruction and the multipurpose court construction. And where,
You know, I
where do you-
walked the basketball court the other day because I was curious, you know? And I'm not an engineer, so I don't, you know, I can't speak to the structure of it, but you can see that there are like hills, you know what I mean? Like it's not flat. It like has its buckling, I guess is the word I would use. So
Yeah.
what?
Next to a couple years ago, right? Oh, in the past too, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that also, that helped me, like, I didn't understand why the multi-purpose court was gonna be expensive, but it kind of makes sense that they have to do the initial setup and everything, so
they've got to penetrate the liner, that's the issue.
exactly right, and make it all flat and create all that, so it kind of made sense.
Yeah.
But I felt like if we're gonna have a basketball, I mean, if you don't spend the 225 for the basketball court, your only other options were to pay the exorbitant amount of money that Joe said he was quoted for, like a 1 or 2 year fix, which to me is not even an option, or it's to close down the basketball court. And if you think of Scenic Hudson, I mean, I think it's an important part of Scenic Hudson. If you take, it's always busy. It's probably the thing that draws like, you know, a different group of people that wouldn't necessarily come, you know, as opposed to say the Little League or whatever. And I think it's a real asset to the park. And so I feel like we don't really have a choice but to fix the court. I mean, does everyone agree with that?
I do.
Okay. So then the main, I don't think there was any questions about the dugout project.
No, of course not.
Donations from the community, yeah.
So that's a great project.
I just know that it sounded like there's like a $5,000 gap. I don't know if we should increase our amount to match that, or if they're planning to do, I thought they'd only raised 35,000, they had said at the meeting.
But they said they could raise more. I think that's why the number's put in as higher, right, Larry?
Yeah, we did this budget based upon what they committed that they would be able to raise, which was $40,000. So we have a budget of 90 with 50 coming from the village.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we should make this 55 versus
If you
50,
want.
or if we just leave as is. I mean,
I mean, I don't think there'd be any objections to that, and it's certainly not a significant number, so.
yeah, I'd be happy to make it 55 and
Okay.
they don't fund anymore, but.
Okay. Fair enough, yep. And then, so the other open question is whether you're interested in going forward with the multipurpose, which is obviously an added feature, not, you know, a necessary repair. So is that something that you're interested in moving forward with, or not?
Personally, I am. I mean, I think it's been something that's been on kind of their wish list for a long time. Obviously not the pickleball portion of it, but that's just paint. But I do think for me, getting the seniors outside more, I think is important. And right now it's a parking lot really, or walking the path if they can. But I feel since it's right off kind of the senior center, to me, it's always kind of made sense. And like, I know we've had like picnics down there and stuff like that. And it just seemed like they should have that flat paved area. You know, then, you know, when I talked to Joe, he told me about all the other programs they could use it for. Since they don't actually have a gym that's their own, they obviously borrow the schools, but you know, I could see it, you know, being used a lot. So, you know, $300,000 is obviously a lot of money, but if it becomes like a vital facility that we didn't have before, I think it could add a lot of good, and I think it could really benefit the seniors who haven't gotten much other than their crappy air conditioner, you know, repaired in a while. So
They could use the gym at the firehouse.
There you go.
There you
I
go.
tend to agree with Brian there. I'm also concerned if we put it off that with our other planned expenses, going forward, it may never
Yeah.
happen. There's
Yeah, I
an
think it also, it fits so nicely in that space, because that's like dead space now, and we have the baseball fields, we have the basketball courts, there's one of the two playgrounds right there, and adding a court there, it makes sense. Once it's in, it would look like it was always in, you know what I mean?
And the park was designed, I don't know if you ever noticed, but the park was designed to be from north to south, the active recreation down to the passive recreation. So a lot of the active stuff is up north. Obviously baseball, soccer, all that's in the middle. And then the ending part is more, passive. And so this wouldn't violate
We're not
that.
gonna put pickleball
Right.
courts at 9/11 memorial or
Right,
something.
yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah,
We're good.
Okay. All right, well, with that, unless you had other specific questions, but I think those are really the main open ones that were sitting there. Then really you're voting to adopt the 2023 capital budget as presented. It was attached to the agenda.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that tonight.
Okay, and then,
I'll go ahead and make a motion to adopt the 2023-2024 capital budget, if I can have a second.
I'll second.
All in favor? Mitch?
Hi.
okay.
All right, Mitch, see you.
Have a good flight.
All right, I'm gonna catch my flight. Thanks, guys. Good to see everyone. Take care.
Thanks for
It
doing
was,
this.
You're welcome. We entertained you this whole time. Much better than downloading Netflix.
All right.
So then, actually, I had one other very quick item, which is, unfortunately, Mitch is off now, but we've been working on the Pride event. And I think I just want to let people know that I anticipate having costs of about $300 potentially. It's kind of on the outside, but I just want to let everyone know. We could always cover it personally, but we assume that everyone would be okay spending about $300 on Pride. I don't know if we need to make a.
No, what we're gonna do is, we're gonna do a budget transfer related to the Juneteenth event. And so we'll include those costs as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what the costs are for Juneteenth, so I didn't,
Yeah, can
wait.
you let me know when we know, because I
Yeah.
don't have a good sense of what that was.
Yeah, no, I'm waiting for the payroll to flow through, so I
Okay.
know,
I'd like to
who
know
worked
that,
and all that.
Yeah, this is
I have
just
no
for
problem with that.
because it's crafts and
Okay.
and we're paying someone to use their speaker and
Right.
sound system.
And I apologize for letting Mitch get off before you appointed the promotion to sergeant. So I'm sorry about that.
Try to call him.
I think he's got more important things to do.
So then.
But we know where he stands on that,
So,
so, yeah.
so then I will also make a motion to appoint Paul Ribibero to the position of sergeant at an annual salary of $148,802. If I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, Paul. Next up, reports of board, standing committees and officers, trustee liaison reports. Start with Larry O.
Got a short update from Ed from the building department. They're busy as usual with board applications and permits and continuing to work on the transition to the new computer system. They're planning to turn on the permit application portion by September and the board applications by December. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Joe just wanted again to reiterate the announcement on fireworks. He's hoping that there'll be a few food trucks down in Matheson as well. Also wanted to thank Arlene and Sarah for doing a great job with the picnic and the concert on Juneteenth. Teamscape starts this Monday. O'Hara High School Summer League Basketball starts Monday at Scenic Hudson. Day camp starts July 5th. The construction in the senior center, as we spoke about, is scheduled to start on July 5th. And now that we've discussed with Larry, we have a place to move over to at St. Barnabas.
Great. Arlene?
Just from DPW, they worked with the highway department. They completed the excavation and drainage repair at Harriman and Lewis Road. They inspected private and public parking lots. They also assisted Parks and Recs with the Juneteenth celebration, and working with the Tree Commission and the O'Hare, I guess with the O'Hare Nature Center personnel. They planted 5 pink flare cherry trees on Main Street, and removed hazardous trees, 2 hazardous trees at Park Road and South Buckout.
Great. Village administrator's report.
So just a quick note that last Friday, several of us, Ed and our engineer Doug Hahn, had a very productive meeting with someone over at the County Department of Public Works to discuss the West Sunnyside Lane culvert that needs to be replaced. There's a culvert that's down by the entrance to the Sunnyside property. And the culvert runs from county property into Tarrytown Street and into Irvington Street, and then onto private historic Hudson Valley property. So it's quite an interesting project. But the good part about it is
No wetlands?
No, there's a pond on historic Hudson Valley's property, but nothing we can do about. The good part about it is that the county was very receptive. They have a flood control money available that they would often fund up to 50% of eligible projects. Some of it's on their property, so I think.
Tarrytown do the other 50%.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, Tarrytown's just caught in the middle of all this, but we all met, again, with Tarrytown folks as well. So it was a good meeting, and we're hopeful that by the middle of the summer, we can get a grant application into the county, and we'll see how that goes. So that's about well, if we had to pay for all of it, it's probably about a $500,000 project. So we're hoping to get half of that funded.
Great, that's great. Girls Clerk Treasurer report.
We had our preliminary audit, which is just the 1-day audit last week. So far, so good. And then our main audit is in a couple weeks, so just getting ready for that. And taxes are coming in and due June 30th.
That's right, yeah, good reminder. Don't want to check. Village Attorney's report.
No.
Public comment. Anyone?
Actually, we do have one with their hand up. Hold on, Earl. See if he's.
I'm very impressed. Earl's still.
Okay, hi there. Hi there,
I'm very,
everyone.
very impressed.
Hi, Earl.
You're very impressed. Well, anyway, I don't want to spoil and be a buzz killer or anything for this evening. But as far as the project on Main Street involving the Village Hall and the expansion of the firehouse, all of that is easily supported because I know the great need of that. But there may be some concerns by historic preservation interests in the village. And it'd be wonderful if the historical society or the historic district people could be consulted or even advised as the project goes along. I know that there are some properties involved in that expansion that are listed on the National Register as contributing properties to the historic district. And it might be good to look at what the impact of that would be on the overall main quality or historic quality of the Main Street in general. And then, there might be some concerns about the people who own properties in the neighborhood with limited incomes and how that might increase their taxes. And maybe we could do some more, public information to local property owners about how that might impact them in terms of their taxes going forward. And the other thing I wanted to ask you was, is the trajectory of this overall project still, does the plan still aim to have a referendum in the fall?
Correct.
Project?
Yes. So it would be on the goal would be to have it on the November ballot if we can.
Okay, so, okay, that's all I wanted to ask, and I wanted to have you consider, my previous comments, and gather more information or inform people more about it before that referendum might take place, that's all.
Yeah, I think as we discussed last time, we kind of need to get all the information. This is the first time we've heard any kind of costs per head, per resident or household. Then just to get it on the ballot, we have to have it all, we have to have the application in by August, but then we could still, July, August, September, October, we could be having, information sessions and things like that.
Yeah, okay, I mean, that's great. People will be away on vacations and things, so, okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you allowing me to comment.
Absolutely. Anyone else, Larry?
Thanks, Earl.
Thanks, Earl. No.
Okay, action items?
Yeah, just one. I'll be bringing up the Rivertown's Chamber of Commerce letter at some point in the future. We'll probably bring it back to a work session to have after you've thought about it, and we'll after we have an opportunity maybe to vet it with the other mayors.
Yeah, makes sense.
So
I guess I'll make a motion to adjourn to executive session regarding collective bargaining. Do I have a second?